the Mafia's hidden rose. The morning slipped in like it was trespassing, pale light creeping over marble floors that never warmed. Isabella stood at the window and counted the cameras out of habit. One in the corner, one by the molding, one disguised as a smoke detector. The room had the hushed sound of a museum. Even her breath felt catalogued. A soft knock. The maid kept her eyes low as she came in with a dress draped over her arms. Mariella followed, pincushion on her wrist, mouth tight in a sympathetic line. Madame prefers the blue, of course. Mariella's fingers worked with quick care, skimming Isabella's waist and shoulders. Pins flashed like tiny blades and then vanished. The fabric smelled like starch and something floral that wasn't flowers. Madame wants the corset tighter, it's already tight. She lifted the laces and the room tilted as Isabella's ribs surrendered. Mariella loosened a fraction when the cameras weren't pointed, a small mercy nobody would notice in the footage. Isabella met her eyes for a heartbeat and looked away before gratitude could be recorded. Another knock, brisk, the air changing before the door opened. Bianca swept in, perfume first, heels clicking a neat rhythm. Arms up. Isabella raised them. The corset protest turned into a wince she didn't let reach her face. Better. Use a little color on your cheeks. Not so much that you look sick, just enough that people mistake you for alive. Isabella nodded. The mirror delivered a pale girl with obedient hair and eyes that wanted to run. Breakfast is in 10. Your father expects punctuality. He does not expect conversation. Bianca's gaze slid down and lingered on the sketchbook on the vanity. A fingertip nudged the cover. Still drawing, what a charming waist, and it helps me think. Think less, walk more like a woman who knows she belongs to something larger than herself. Bianca left without closing the door. Isabella breathed shallow and picked up a soft brush, a touch of blush, a line on her mouth. Nothing that would be considered opinion. The corridors to the dining room were lined with oil portraits that didn't bother pretending to like her. Guards stood at intervals, radios at their shoulders like second hearts. The head of security watched from the end of the hallway, gaze sweeping and landing, sweeping again. He nodded once at Isabella without warmth. She returned nothing. Attention was a basket with a hole at the bottom in this house. Whatever you put in fell out in the end. The dining room gleamed in polished silence. Vittorio sat at the head, hands folded near a coffee cup. His rings caught the light and threw small suns across the tablecloth. He didn't look up when Isabella entered, only moved one finger the way a conductor calls a violin to tune. Bianca was late by design. She arrived like a cold front, kissed Vittorio's cheek, and took the chair to his right. The head of security stood by the door with two men behind him, faces the usual combination of alert and blank. Isabella took her seat. A footman waited until Vittorio's eyes flickered to plate lids and then lifted them in the approved order. Fruit, pastries, eggs, two of everything, as if hunger were a guest they might entertain. Bianca's smile hovered over her grapefruit like a moth. Sit up, you collapse like a neglected rose. Isabella straightened. The corset bit a rib. Vittorio folded the paper a maid had set near his plate. He didn't open it. We have a fitting schedule today and 3 deliveries. There will be guests at dinner. You will be present. You will not be noticed. Bianca carved the grapefruit with precise malice. She should be noticed just enough to improve other people's behavior. Pretty things motivate the staff. The spoon clinked against porcelain. Vittorio's gaze lifted an inch. Do not invite your cruelty to breakfast. Bianca's smile sweetened without warming. I never need an invitation. Isabella focused on the edge of the plate where a hairline crack ran like a river on a map. The footman hovered close with a pot of coffee. She nodded. The cup filled. The smell made her think of mornings before she knew the taste of fear. Bianca set down the spoon and examined Isabella like a potter studying a cooling vase. The dress hangs. Mariella is getting sloppy. Mariella is careful. Careful is not enough. Precise is required. Vittorio's ring tapped once, a bell tone. Enough. He shifted his attention to the head of security. I want patrols doubled on the east wing after noon. Cameras were refitted on the north wall. Confirm the angles. The head of security inclined his head. One of the men behind him scribbled notes on a small pad. Isabella kept her eyes on the coffee. Each swallow smoothed the morning into something she might survive. Bianca reached for a roll and didn't taste it. You will accompany us on a drive along the water. The press has been restless, and the city needs to see that we are content. I understand and smile. Less teeth? There. Do you hear that, Vittorio? She understands. Vittorio didn't answer. He was good at letting a moment choose its shape on its own. A guard at the door shifted a fraction. The head of security's gaze cut to him. The fraction corrected itself. Isabella sometimes thought the house vibrated at a frequency only the men could hear. When breakfast ended, Vittorio rose and the chairs moved as if pulled by strings. Staff fluttered in with a cadence perfected over years. Bianca walked beside Isabella into the foyer, one hand light on her elbow like a pretty cuff. Do not pause in the doorway, it looks like hesitation. The foyer doors were glossy and heavy and opened as if by thought. Sunlight struck marble and broke into shards. Outside, drivers stood at attention beside black cars. The courtyard smelled faintly of oil and wet stone. A breeze skimmed her hair. She wanted to tip her face into it and let it peel off a layer. The head of security spoke quietly to two new recruits. One of them stood with an eager jaw. The other carried stillness like a weight he'd learned to balance. He looked up toward the east wing windows once, as if measuring distance. Name, Luca. The head of security's gaze traveled from the boots to the eyes. You were with Russo until last month. Why did you leave? Order. He didn't have enough. We have plenty. Luca's mouth didn't move, but something in the set of his shoulders eased like someone deciding not to apologize for breathing. He'll take escort on the water drive, Bianca's voice cut in. Let's test his awareness while the stakes are low. A guard opened the rear door of the second car. Isabella slid in. The leather held the cold like it held everything else. Bianca took the first car with Vittorio. The convoy rolled toward the iron gates. The cameras tilted to watch them go like tired birds. Luca took the front passenger seat of Isabella's car. The driver adjusted his mirror to include Luca's eyes. The road beyond the walls ran neat between trees. People walked expensive dogs and pretended not to see anything they shouldn't. The city glittered where it thought it looked best. Isabella watched reflections slide over glass. The corset punished every deep breath, so she took small ones and saved the rest for thinking. At a stoplight near a florist, a woman lifted a bucket of roses onto the curb. Petals flashed red like small alarms. Isabella's hand rose to the window without meaning to. Her palm met cool glass. Luca's gaze found the movement in the mirror, and then the roses, and then her face. He turned the vent toward the back, sending a ribbon of air to where she sat. Thank you. His eyes flickered in the mirror. The car moved. He looked away. The waterfront wore its practiced shimmer. Boats bobbed in polite rhythm. The restaurant was the kind with long white tablecloths and staff who looked like they apologized when they slept. The manager greeted Bianca and Vittorio with eager respect that smelled like performance. Chairs appeared in the exact moment a body wished to sit. The wind tried to muss Bianca's hair and thought better of it. Isabella followed, the guards forming a moving frame around the family. Luca took a position behind her right shoulder. He scanned the street, windows, the jogger with headphones, the old man with a newspaper, the glint in a second-floor pane that might be a camera lens catching light. He stood close enough to intercept trouble and far enough to be forgotten by anyone who wasn't looking to pick a fight. The table offered a view of water that shouted about freedom. Vittorio talked about shipments and schedules in the tone of a man discussing morning weather. We avoid delays by avoiding surprises. No one at the table argued. Arguing was a sport reserved for rooms without views. Bianca sipped a sparkling water and smiled at a woman who wanted to be noticed. We should host another charity event. Photographers have been hungry. Let them eat something sweet. The manager leaned in. We can arrange a gala within 2 weeks. 1 week, Bianca corrected, and make sure the lighting understands my face. Isabella let her gaze drift to the railing. Beyond it, a child reached for his father's hand, and the man offered it without looking down, as if the connection were muscle memory. A sound rose in Isabella's chest that she didn't allow past her lips. Bianca's attention slid sharp as a blade, enjoying the spectacle. I'm just looking at the water. Careful. Water reflects what you show it, and sometimes it reflects what's real. Bianca's smile felt like frost on glass. Reality is an arrangement. Your father is very good at it. The waiter arrived with plates arranged like art. Isabella lifted a fork because the motion felt correct, not because hunger had returned. She tasted something that had an expensive name and no flavor. The wind picked up. A napkin darted from a nearby table like a small animal breaking ranks. Luca caught it without looking away from the street and set it back under the glass as if it had simply changed its mind. On the ride back, clouds moved in over the water. The city lost its shine and showed its bones. The convoy slipped through traffic without touching it. At the gate, the cars paused long enough for the cameras to blink. Inside, the house swelled around them, swallowing street noise in a gulp. Staff angled their bodies to become part of the architecture again. A gardener wiped a clean hand because habit insisted. In the foyer, Vittorio spoke to the head of security in a low voice. Double the men at the east entrance tonight. We'll have company later. Understood. Isabella walked toward the staircase. Bianca's fingers found her arm. You will rest and then review the guest list. If someone of importance asks your name, offer it. Nothing more. Someone's name is importance enough. Charm is currency. You spend it and replace it. Do not hoard what you cannot protect. Isabella moved up the eastern stairs with care, the corset reminding her not to own her lungs. The house exhaled and inhaled by schedule. Somewhere, a door closed with soft finality. She entered her room and leaned her forehead to the cool glass of the window for exactly 3 counts. Then she straightened. The cameras would prefer strength. She opened the sketchbook and drew a line that could be a horizon or a prison bar, depending on the tilt of your head. She added a small boat, then erased it, then drew a shore she had never stood on. She drew a woman on a terrace, turning her face to wind that did not ask permission. A discreet knock. The guard on duty lifted his chin toward the hall. Luca stood behind him, hands loose at his sides. Perimeter walk, Miss Romano. Thank you. They moved through the house in a route Isabella knew in her bones, down past the family portraits, across the gallery where a blank space still held the ghost of a missing frame, through the conservatory where plants were taught not to rebel, past the service door where the hum of machines stitched domestic life together behind the scenes. Do you like it here? It's clean. Clean and kind are not the same. I didn't confuse them. They reached the conservatory and paused. Light filtered through glass and turned the leaves into stained glass windows of their own making. A fern brushed her knuckles when she dared let her hand hover. The air tasted green. You're not like the others. That could be an insult in this house, and it isn't. He looked at the pattern of tile like it had secrets. The head of security wants the side entrance watched longer in the afternoons. There's a glare at a certain hour. You can't see faces in cars. Is that a problem? Glare always is. She wanted to ask a dozen other questions and knew the walls would answer them with interest if she did. They finished the loop. The head of security passed them in the gallery with a nod that meant, continue to exist exactly as you are. A maid maneuvered a cart loaded with folded napkins, her eyes flicking up to Isabella with the quiet hope that the day might end without incident. Back at the landing, Isabella slowed. Voices floated up from the study, Vittorio's among them. She couldn't catch words, only the rhythm of someone who expected the world to obey, and had, so far, been right. Luca glanced toward the sound and back. Your door will have another guard in an hour. If you need the conservatory again, the west corridor is less watched after 6. Thank you. He hesitated, measuring something invisible. The plants like it when you breathe near them. People pretend to teach them how to grow. They know already. He went down the stairs with that same contained stillness. Isabella stood alone for a moment, listening to the house hum. Then she returned to her room, pulled the curtains a little wider, and let the sky in. Bianca entered without knocking. The room felt smaller as soon as she did. "You will change for dinner. I've laid out something that won't embarrass anyone." "Nothing I wear has embarrassed me." "You don't understand the sport. The goal is to embarrass other people for you." Isabella looked at the dress on the bed. Silver threads caught the light in a net. Her skin prickled at the idea of being caught by anything, even shimmer. Who are the guests? People with names, people without, someone who dislikes tardiness? What will they want? To be seen wanting. Bianca's reflection hung next to Isabella's in the mirror. Two versions of survival. Your father is making arrangements, the right kind, the kind that secure futures. For whom? For the family. Surely you know you are not separate from that. Bianca left before Isabella could mold a reply into something that would not be used against her later. The silence after Bianca was a relief, edged with dread. Evening deepened by degrees. The house lowered its voice. Lamps woke up in pools. Staff moved faster because people were coming, who noticed everything. In the courtyard, the guards shifted positions like chess pieces reconsidering the board. Isabella watched from the window and found Luca near the northern wall, pointing for a younger guard at a blind corner. He adjusted the angle of a camera with 2 fingers and then stepped back to see what it saw. He looked up, not at her window, not quite, but close enough that a pulse kicked in her throat. She let the curtain fall the width of a finger and waited until her heartbeat remembered its job. On the vanity, the sketchbook lay open to the shore. She drew a hand, reaching down, not to take, but to steady. She shaded an eye until it became the color of weather between storms. She did not write a name. The pencil left a faint smear on her finger. She lifted it to her mouth and tasted graphite. Old school days. The idea of choices. Another knock. A maid entered with a tray she hadn't asked for. Tea. 2 thin biscuits. The maid set it down with the respectful quiet of someone who knew her work kept everyone else from drowning. Will there be music tonight? Maybe. I like it when there's music. The clatter sounds less like clatter. Me too. The maid almost smiled and then remembered there were records of everything. The clock hands tilted toward evening appointments. Isabella changed into the dress Bianca chose, feeling the net of silver land on her skin. She stood very still in the mirror and practiced ownership of her own face. In the hallway, the guard at her door was replaced by another. The head of security spoke low into his radio and told men to move where they already stood. The house squared its shoulders. Somewhere below, a door opened to admit names and deals. Isabella touched the open page on her vanity. The graphite came off on her fingertip again. She pressed it to the blank margin and left a print. Not a signature, not a confession. A proof. Downstairs, voices gathered. Vittorio's carried a thread of pleasure that meant something was going as planned. Bianca's laughter glided along surfaces like oil. Staff made themselves smaller and moved faster when they sensed footsteps changing direction. Isabella moved toward the staircase. The cameras watched. The house watched. She put her hand on the banister and felt the cold smoothness of control. Then she lifted her chin. Not high. Not enough to invite punishment, just enough to keep her airway open. At the bottom of the stairs, Vittorio glanced up. His gaze measured her, calculated returns, and nodded once, satisfied. Smile, Isabella. We will be deciding many things in the coming days. Her mouth obeyed. The smile reached no further than duty. She felt Bianca's eyes approve and reject in the same breath. Behind them, near the column where light turned to shadow, Luca stood at his post, attention pinned to the room and also, for a fleeting second, to her. It was not a promise. It was not a plea. It was a recognition, like 2 notes in the same key finding each other in a crowded song. The house swelled with strangers. The night opened its mouth. Isabella smoothed the silver net and stepped forward into the evening that would pretend to be ordinary while it arranged the rest of her life. The music didn't reach the edges of the room. It hovered under the chandeliers like a polite ghost while people traded smiles that felt like contracts. Isabella stood where Bianca had placed her, half framed by a marble column, the silver dress catching every light like a net that had learned to glitter. Bianca slid in beside her with a glass that matched her jewelry. "Stand taller. If you fold, someone will ask why." Isabella lifted her chin a degree. A waiter drifted near with a tray of canapes, hesitated under Bianca's stare. Isabella took one to give him someplace to put his nerves. Bianca adjusted the tray anyway. "If you insist on eating, chew invisibly." Across the room, Vittorio held a cluster of men who leaned in when he spoke. The head of security hovered within 3 strides, radio tucked to his mouth like a secret. Guards filled doorways without being seen. Staff moved like they had read everyone's minds before the first car arrived. Luca held the north corner, part shadow, part sconce light. The suit turned him into a straight line in the room's geometry, but his attention kept moving. Doors, windows, a second-floor mirror, the reflection in a wine bottle. When he looked across the crowd and found Isabella, the contact lasted only a breath, but it felt like someone had opened a window. Bianca's nails tapped the stem of her glass. "Smile at Mrs. Bellini. She collects pretty women and stories about them." Isabella lifted a small smile. The woman in diamonds warmed, satisfied to be seen seeing. A footman approached with fresh glasses. The tray tilted. One flute slid, caught the lip of the tray, spun, and shattered against a table leg. Silence pressed down for the length of a heartbeat. Bianca turned her head with surgical precision. "Careless." The young man crouched, hands shaking, gathering shards that wanted to bite. Isabella reached for a napkin and folded it to shield his fingers. Bianca's voice cut across the moment. "Stand up, Isabella, you are not staff." Isabella set the folded napkin on the floor for the footman to use and rose. Luca was already there, smooth and invisible. He swept the largest pieces into the cloth, folded it again so the edges couldn't cut, handed it to the footman with a steadying look that slowed the boy's breath. Then he was back at his post. The disruption watered down into background noise. Vittorio's gaze flicked to Luca in brief approval, then moved on to the next calculation. A new man joined his circle, older, sun-burnished in a way that didn't come from parks. His eyes strayed to Isabella, the way fingers stray to expensive fabric. "It is good to finally meet you." "My daughter," Vittorio said, a credit to her mother's face. "Enchanting." Bianca's grip found Isabella's elbow not to support but to position. The stranger's smile held a private appetite before it remembered where it was. "Discipline travels well," he said, and let his attention slide back to Vittorio's terms. The music remembered itself. Laughter resumed where it had left off. Isabella's skin prickled like it wanted to step out of the dress and run. The terrace door stood open a hand's width for air. She slipped through the gap, and the night rinsed the heat from her face. The garden lay in disciplined lines. Hedges squared, gravel raked, lamps set to cast obedient circles of light. Beyond the glass, plants in the conservatory turned into shadows of themselves. The wind brought a faint scent of green and metal. Footsteps paused at the door. Luca waited to let a maid with a tray pass through. He didn't step onto the terrace until Isabella glanced back. "Fresh air is permitted." "Then I'll pretend I asked permission." He came outside and kept respectful distance, the chill raised bumps along her arms. He shrugged out of his jacket without commentary and held it out. She accepted because cold told the truth. "Thank you." They walked the path along the hedges. Gravel made a careful hush under their feet. Light pooled and broke at their ankles as they crossed from circle to circle. "Do you ever get used to the cameras?" "You stop expecting privacy, that's different. I used to hide behind curtains, they still caught me. Curtains don't hide the sound of breathing." "Breathing loud is a luxury in some places." They reached the bench under a clipped tree. Isabella rested a hand on the back instead of sitting. The corset reminded her who owned her ribs. You speak to the staff like they matter. They do. Most people here save kindness for mirrors. Mirrors never forget who looked into them. A faint smile moved his mouth and left. On the lower path a guard passed, nodded to Luca, kept going. Above, the study windows were dark, like closed eyes. Only the hall lamps burned for show. Bianca humiliates me because it makes her feel strong. It's easier to cut than to build. Do you think this house is building anything? It's a palace. Palaces have dungeons. A night insect ticked against the conservatory and found its way to open air. Isabella pulled the jacket closer and hated that gratitude felt unfamiliar. You noticed my hand at the florist. You pressed it to the glass. Most people press hands to glass when they want something they already own. I wanted the smell. That's honest. Honesty isn't a currency we use. That's why it's valuable. She looked at him directly. The gray of his eyes had that before-storm color that could still choose to pass. A voice moved across the garden from the doorway. The head of security didn't raise it. He never needed to. Back inside, family at the table. Luca took the jacket from her shoulders with the same careful neutrality he'd used when he offered it. His fingers didn't linger. He folded the jacket over his arm and turned back toward the door. Isabella let the night air have one more second on her face. Thank you for letting me feel like a person. You didn't borrow that. They slipped into the heat again. People arranged themselves into new patterns. Vittorio crooked a finger, and the crowd rearranged so Isabella could be displayed and not touched. The older man with the sunburned confidence took Isabella's hand and held it a fraction too long. Bianca's mouth softened and sharpened at the same time. Smile as if you mean it, she breathed. Less teeth. Introductions rotated. Names that moved ships, names that closed accounts. Names that made rooms colder. Isabella smiled on cue and held her core tight so the dress wouldn't feel like a trap. When the last guest left, the house changed key. Musicians counted tips behind polite screens. Staff worked faster now that they were allowed to be human again. The lemon cleaner returned, covering the smell of other people's perfume. Vittorio dismissed the remains of the evening with the smoothness of a man erasing a whiteboard. Bianca floated up the stairs with one last look to make sure no detail had escaped her. The head of security split guards into corridors like placing chess pieces. Luca took the turn that watched both the study and the east wing. Isabella carried a glass of water as a prop and followed the quieter service corridor because it had fewer eyes. Voices from the study drifted into the hall, contained by a door that hadn't learned to close completely. She told herself to keep walking. Her feet disobeyed. She stopped where the column shadow thickened and listened because knowing is a kind of armor when you have nothing else. We need it signed within the month. Vittorio's voice held amusement. You want speed when care would last longer. Care is expensive, another man answered. Salvatore likes his prizes while they're new. Bianca's tone arrived, cool, exact. The announcement can be made at the gala. People accept anything if you make them dress for it. A bride who brings a port and a name, the other man murmured. You've raised her carefully. A pause long enough to weigh money. You'll honor the docking rights, Vittorio said, and the dates. And the girl. She'll do as she's told. She was made for that, Bianca added, like she was evaluating fabric. The glass trembled in Isabella's hand. She cushioned it against her palm so the saucer wouldn't sing. The hallway seemed to tilt, then corrected. Her mother's voice rose from a room that no longer existed. If you are lost, listen for kindness. If you can't hear it, move toward the quiet. Footsteps approached. The head of security passed, eyes on his list of living pieces, and didn't expect to see her in a corridor where decisions happened. The door eased closer to shut. Words turned to murmur. Isabella turned away and found the main hall without remembering the first steps. Luca stood at the corner where the staircase met the corridor, gaze on a guard adjusting an urn that had never needed adjusting. He looked at Isabella and took in the water, the color gone from her face, the fact that her hand had remembered how to shake. He moved to her as if the room had pushed him. Breathe. Air hurt going in, then helped. Not here. He angled his body to block her from any casual glance and guided her to the narrow alcove with the nailed window. The alcove was never used because it led nowhere. That made it valuable. They're going to sell me, she whispered. Not with that word, but it fits. When? A month. A gala. An announcement. Who? A name that tasted wrong. He nodded once as if placing a piece on a board. Go to your room, do not break your pattern. Patterns are what keep you invisible. Tomorrow, if you need air, the conservatory door sticks. Pull left, then up. Breathing or doors? Both. A guard's footfall passed and faded. Luca stayed between her and the hall until the quiet felt like cover again. She gathered herself into the same shape she wore at breakfast and walked to her door carrying the water like it had always been part of her hand. The guard straightened. She nodded and entered her room. The perfume of the evening still ghosted the air. She set the glass on the vanity and watched the surface settle. 2 notches in the corset loosened, and air finally found the bottom of her lungs. The sketchbook waited like a friend who never asked questions. She drew lines that could be storm or sea, and a small ship with no flags. She drew a port that would not be traded, and a hand extended palm up, offering balance instead of terms. A tap at the door made her freeze. All secure, Miss Romano. Thank you. The peephole showed nothing but a shoulder and a wall. She turned off the bright lamp, left the softer light, and sat near the window where the curtains hid her from everything but the moon. The house hummed through its bones. Somewhere under the hum she imagined an ocean she had never touched. She lay on the bed without undressing and counted breaths until they became something like sleep. When morning slid into the room, it brought the hollow quiet of a house that changes guards at dawn. She braided her hair because her hands needed work. The mirror showed a face that was learning to keep secrets. She opened the curtains an inch. The courtyard wore a brief shine of dew. Guards traded places with the rhythm of people who knew timing mattered more than bravery. Near the northern wall, Luca checked the camera that caught the afternoon glare and glanced, almost like checking a clock, toward the east wing windows. She stepped back before Hope could see her. A maid knocked with a small tray. Early breakfast. I couldn't sleep. The conservatory smells like leaves making decisions. That sounds like relief. It is. The maid set the tray down and left. Isabella drank tea when it wouldn't burn. The city beyond the gate cleared its throat for the day. The house would get loud by noon. Bianca would sharpen the edges of everything. Vittorio would move crates and people with the same voice. Isabella lifted the sketchbook again and touched the drawing of the untraded port. Not every prison lasts forever. It wasn't a plan. Not yet. But it was no longer only fear. It had a direction. She dressed in something Bianca could not scold and mapped the day in ordinary shapes that wouldn't set off alarms. The house loved repetition. She would give it repetition. And under that pattern, quiet would find a place to grow. Dawn slid along the glass like a careful hand. Isabella dressed in a simple day dress Bianca couldn't fault, and moved through the quiet house toward the conservatory. The corridor lights hummed low. A maid glanced up from polishing a banister and stepped aside with a faint smile that looked almost like luck. At the conservatory door, she remembered Luca's words. Pull left, then up. The latch caught, resisted, then surrendered. Warmth spilled over her like a hidden season. The air smelled of earth and green and something patient. She closed the door softly behind her. Leaves lifted in a draft she made by existing. The large fig in the corner spread its branches like a quiet hand. She stood under it and let her breath lengthen until the corset stopped winning. Footsteps outside. A shape moved past the frosted pane. She stayed still, listening for voices that carried orders. None came. The plants held their secrets. Her chest stopped hurting. A soft knock. Not the house's demanding kind. She opened the door a crack. Luca stood on the threshold, a ribbon of cool air at his back. No one else nearby. He glanced past her shoulder as if the room could hide trouble. Too early for anyone to miss you. I needed to know the door wasn't a story. It sticks less in the afternoon. Heat helps. She stepped aside and he didn't enter. He respected lines even when no one drew them for him. Do you ever think about leaving places like this? And every day. And planning is quiet work. Mine started last night. I figured. She looked at the greenery and the old ironwork that held it in polite shapes. If I disappear for 10 minutes in the mornings, will anyone notice? Not if you leave the same way every day and come back with the same face. I can do that. Good. A guard's footsteps echoed faintly from the far hall. Luca shifted a fraction to turn his shoulder to the sound. Today will be heavy. Keep your balance. Is there a way to practice that? Touch something that's alive before you have to touch what isn't. She rested her palm on a leaf. It was warm and slightly waxy, and for a strange small moment she felt claimed by something kind. Bianca's voice carried from the corridor, bright and cutting. Isabella, rehearsal. Luca stepped back as if he had only been checking a hinge. Isabella closed the door and slipped into the hall. Bianca stood near the corner, a file in her hands, rings catching light like small alarms. You vanish like a child. Do not make me walk further than necessary. I was in the conservatory. Don't start a hobby. Hobbies make girls sloppy. Bianca held out the file. Pages in neat stacks, names, notes written in a slanted hand. Guest list for the gala. You will greet 3 of these men by name if you cross them. Anyone else gets a smile that looks like you could say their name if you wanted. Practice. Isabella walked and read, letting the words settle on her tongue. Bianca watched her mouth, the way a director watches an actor learning to lie convincingly. Again. Isabella repeated the names with the accent Bianca preferred. A maid passed them carrying folded linens like a small white city. Bianca's eyes flicked and found a crease that did not meet her standard. Start over, Bianca told the maid without raising her voice. The maid turned back with a whispered apology to no one. Isabella folded the file closed. I have them. You have the outline of them. You will have the rest before dinner. Change your dress. You look like a governess. Mariella waited in Isabella's room with 3 options draped like choices that weren't. She pinned and unpinned with fast fingers, always finding a way to leave an extra breath's worth of ease where a camera wouldn't notice. Thank you. Mariella pretended to tidy a ribbon so she could answer without being seen. Small steps. The big ones come later. When Bianca left to terrorize the florists by phone, Isabella took 10 quiet minutes. She sat at the vanity, opened the sketchbook, and drew a key in 2 strokes, then erased it. Not a key, a path, thin and patient. She closed the book and placed it under a stack of handkerchiefs, the way she used to hide notes from tutors in plain sight. The day gathered itself. Trucks arrived at the service gate. Men in shirt sleeves carried crates into rooms that pretended not to need crates. The head of security placed men where he had already placed them yesterday, adjusting the angle of a camera by a degree. Vittorio passed through it all like a center of gravity. He found Isabella near the stairs and regarded her with the bored curiosity of someone checking the time. You will dine with us tonight. Briefly. Of course. There will be a statement. What kind? A useful one. Bianca's heels announced her before she appeared. She will be graceful. She will be silent, Vittorio corrected. They moved away together, a partnered weather system. Isabella exhaled. A guard at the end of the hall watched a sliver of nothing with fierce attention. The house purred, pleased with itself. Late afternoon, the sky lowered. Rain pressed its face against the windows without committing. Lamps sparked to life in the hallways, making the portraits look smug. A maid carried in a tray and nearly dropped it when Isabella thanked her by name. The girl colored like someone who had been kissed for the first time. In the kitchen, the chef stood like a captain among his stainless steel fleet. Isabella slipped in because she liked the heat and the unpretentious noise. Cooks moved with efficient grace, exchanging quiet jokes that had nothing to do with power. When the chef saw her, he straightened as if court had entered. "I'm not checking on you." "That makes me feel worse. I wanted to smell something honest." He lifted a lid and let steam kiss her face. Tomato, basil, the whisper of garlic. "It's almost peaceful in here." "That's because you're not paying for any of it." She smiled and left before someone could report she had contaminated the staff with humanity. Evening pressed the house into a sharper shape. Bianca chose the silver again. The net felt tighter, like it had learned new tricks while it hung in the wardrobe. In the mirror, Isabella practiced the kind of smile that didn't mean anything, and still gave people what they wanted. She pinned her hair back from her face, not because Bianca liked it, but because it kept her edges visible to herself. The foyer filled with practice steps, guards at posts, staff in their places. Vittorio emerged from his study with a pocket square that matched the tie someone had chosen for him hours ago. He looked at Isabella as if confirming inventory. "Tonight is simple." Bianca fastened a bracelet around Isabella's wrist and tapped it once, not a caress, not a warning, a calibration. "Don't blink when you should nod." The dining room seated them in a particular order that told anyone who understood such things everything they needed to know. Vittorio at the head, Bianca at his right, Isabella halfway down, visible but not central. Luca took a position against the far wall. Not a silhouette, not an ornament, just a line that would move if the room moved wrong. The first courses arrived. Words about shipments wrapped themselves around words about art to convince the table that power had a soul. Laughter came in appropriate lengths. A man across from Isabella asked if she played piano. She didn't. He looked relieved, as if culture might have required effort. Vittorio lifted his glass. The room stilled because rooms like this are trained to listen. "Family and friends, we live under a lucky sky tonight." He let the pause ripen. "An alliance benefits those who plan for it. In a month's time, we will join this house with one that understands discipline. The announcement will be made at the gala. The terms are already agreed." Eyes flickered toward Isabella and back. Bianca looked at Isabella with a softness so well practiced it almost fooled the air. "Congratulations," someone offered, as if a blessing could be a bandage. "Fortunate," another murmured, tasting the word like a wine. Isabella kept the smile she had rehearsed. Inside, her ribs went cold. She lifted her glass because her hand had been trained to. The water shivered against the crystal. Bianca leaned as if to kiss the air. "A season of joy." A man near the end of the table lifted his chin in Luca's direction without fully turning his head. Luca's gaze didn't move from the doors. He was listening to the hallway, the patio, the small click of a radio downstairs, the rain deciding finally to commit. Vittorio lowered his glass and the room resumed. Conversations reattached to their previous owners. The music in the adjacent room tried to be gentle and succeeded at being forgettable. Between courses, Isabella's fork hesitated above her plate. Words swelled up like a tide she thought she had dammed. She kept them behind her teeth and swallowed broth that tasted of nothing. Bianca touched her wrist with 2 fingers. An affectionate correction for any camera that might be watching. "You are radiant," she whispered, letting the word travel. Isabella folded the word and put it in the drawer where she kept phrases that meant the opposite. Dessert arrived with a sparkler that fizzed for nobody in particular. Guests clapped because hands love a reason to be busy. The head of security stepped into the doorway and nodded once toward Vittorio. Vittorio nodded back without changing expression. Something somewhere had happened on schedule. When it ended all at once. Chairs pushed. Coats appeared as if by magic. The sound of expensive fabric brushing expensive fabric filled the space like a well-behaved storm. People kissed air and left traces of perfume and intentions. Staff stripped the table to its bones with speed and humility. The lemon cleaner came back with its quiet promise to erase everything. Vittorio dismissed the room with a small gesture that belonged to kings. Bianca paused at Isabella's shoulder. "You didn't embarrass anyone. I'm almost proud." "Almost counts. In charity, not in my house." She glided away, already making new lists in her head. Isabella slipped out of the tide and into the corridor where pictures watched and didn't help. Her feet found the service path that always smelled faintly of soap. The conservatory door waited like a patient friend. Pull left, then up. Warmth again. Leaf shadows again. Relief that felt like stepping into a dream you remembered from childhood. She sat on the bench this time. No corset needed to be loosened. She had learned to breathe around it. A single drop from the glass roof hit the stone beside her and exploded into nothing. The door eased open. She didn't startle. Her body had already decided who it would be. I thought you might come here. I'm predictable. Predictable is safe. I don't feel safe. You won't, not yet. He didn't come closer than the path. He put his hands in his pockets as if to keep them from offering something the room wasn't ready to hold. They made the announcement. I heard. Everyone clapped. People clap for all kinds of things. She laughed once, a small broken thing that still found its way out. I used to think I would fall in love and know it. There would be a moment like the books promised. I would be chosen, and I would choose. You were chosen for other people. I'm tired of being a decision someone else already made. Leaves made soft applause overhead. Rain ticked somewhere far away with the patience of weather. He looked at the plants the way he looked at hallways. I can get you to air again. I can get you to the gate when there's a gap. But you can't run without something to run to. Do you understand? Yes. Good. Start building the part after the gate in your head. The house hates that kind of architecture. My mother's family. He didn't react beyond the slightest tilt of his head, as if a map had oriented itself. Never say it near wood or wire. I won't. Until then, we move like this. Ordinary. Same roots. Same pauses. You do not disappear unless it looks like an accident. I can exist, I've had practice. You can live, it will just look like existing for a while. The words did not comfort, they steadied, it was better. I overheard a name last night. Keep it, names are keys, use them when the door deserves it. She clasped her hands together so she wouldn't reach for him. The urge embarrassed her, and it didn't. He noticed without looking. You're allowed to be scared. If I start, I won't stop. You'll stop. Fear is loud at the beginning. She nodded because the act of nodding felt like grabbing a rail. Thank you, she whispered. For the jacket. For the door. For being a person who looks at other people the way people are supposed to look at each other. You're welcome. Why are you here, not tonight, in this house? Because I have experience with chaos and I wanted to see if order could do better. And it can, on paper. She almost smiled. Then why help me? Because order should protect the right things. The air went thinner. She stood because sitting felt too much like surrender. He didn't step back. He let the closeness exist, without the pressure of taking advantage of it. If someone in this house asks you if you're happy, what will you do? Lie. Good. How will I know when it's time? You'll feel the house get impatient, men like your father get excited the way storms do. Pressure builds, doors open to blow it off, that's when. And you, I'll be there. She closed her eyes for a second because the promise felt like oxygen. When she opened them, his gaze had moved to the door, listening. The head of security's voice passed down the far hall. Patrol change. Go, Luca murmured. Routine matters. They left the conservatory together but not together, timing the steps so a camera couldn't trim them into one. In the corridor, a maid with a cart, startled, then realized she was in no one's way. She pushed on, humming something she would deny if asked. At Isabella's door, the guard on duty straightened. Luca stopped a stride short, became furniture again. Isabella touched the handle and paused. Not every prison lasts forever, she whispered. Especially the ones that think they do. She opened the door and slipped inside. The room smelled faintly of silver polish and lemon oil, like a dress rehearsal for cleanliness. She towed off her shoes and stood on the rug in her bare feet. The softness felt almost dangerous. At the vanity, the sketchbook waited under its cover of handkerchiefs. She opened it to the page with the untraded port. Her pencil made a line that connected shore to shore without a bridge, only intention. She drew a small figure on a deck, face turned toward wind. She did not draw anyone else on the page. Some things were safer, unwritten. Below, the house settled into its night rhythm. Radios clicked and quieted. Latches tested themselves. Bianca's laughter flared once and vanished like a match. Vittorio's study door closed with the authority of a period at the end of a long sentence. Isabella lay on the bed without fully undoing the dress. She stared at the ceiling until the plaster blurred and then sharpened again. The announcement existed now. It walked the halls. It called itself fate. She listened to her own breath until it no longer sounded like someone else's property. She pictured the conservatory at dawn, the leaf under her palm, the door that would give if you pulled left first, then up. She pictured Luca at his post, eyes on the space where trouble likes to hide, and the steadiness in his voice when everything else wobbled. In that picture, the map in her chest added a road she had not known how to draw yesterday. It led away from the table where her life had been traded, past the walls that had renamed love as obedience, toward a place where her mother's face did not have to be remembered to be real. Her eyes closed. Not sleep yet. Not peace. A pause, enough to carry her across midnight and into a morning that would demand a perfect repeat of everything. She would give the house its repetition. Under it, she would build something else. In the quiet before morning, men checked their radios. She let herself believe a single, fragile, necessary thing. He would help her run. She would let him. And when the gate finally opened, she would not be stepping into nothing. She would be stepping into a name her father had tried to erase. For the first time in years, the thought did not feel like fantasy. It felt like the beginning of a plan. Morning skimmed the glass with a thin light that made everything look colder. Isabella woke with the taste of applause still in her mouth, and the memory of water trembling in a crystal glass. The announcement had stepped into the house like a person and settled in every chair. She lay still and listened to the early sounds the walls made when the staff woke the day. Pipes clicked, carts rolled. A door sighed at the end of the corridor where the laundry lived. She sat up and reached for the sketchbook she had tucked beneath handkerchiefs. The first line she drew was almost a crack. The second turned it into a path. She drew a coastline again, not for beauty, but because it was the only shape that did not feel like a cage. She shaded in a door, erased the lock, and left the key as a space rather than a thing. A soft knock brought Mariella in with a dress that had been born to be approved by someone else. She set it over a chair and measured Isabella with her eyes, not a tape. Pins glittered like fish along the little cushion on her wrist. Isabella stood and let herself be arranged. The corset tugged and her ribs remembered their lesson. Mariella eased a finger under the laces and gifted a whisper of breath, where the cameras would not see it. Isabella met her look in the mirror for only a second. It was enough. Madame prefers the pale silver for daylight. The blue is for evening. She wants poise. I will be quiet. Quiet is not the same, and I know. Mariella's hands worked without noise. When she finished, she smoothed the skirt the way people do when they want to touch someone's arm and cannot. She slipped away before the corridor could witness the moment and turn it into a story. Bianca arrived without knocking. Her perfume took corners first. She circled Isabella the way a hunter circles a trapped animal that must still look presentable on a wall. She lifted 2 strands of hair and let them fall. You slept, your face shows it. Fix the softness, men confuse it for hope. Isabella reached for the brush. The bristles made a hush across her cheeks. She avoided the shade that had pleased Bianca at the party, because last night it had made her look like a fever. Bianca watched and found something to correct anyway. Your mouth turns down when you are thinking, train it. People will study you now and imagine their own meanings. Do not give them the pleasure of a readable page. I understand. Do you? Understanding means execution, and I will execute. Bianca smiled like a blade lay hidden behind her teeth. She set a slim case on the vanity and tapped it with a finger. Names for this morning. Repeat the ones with money attached to them. The others can be learned when they become useful. Isabella opened the case and found cards with notes in Bianca's precise hand. She repeated 3 names, then 3 more. Bianca adjusted the weight of a syllable and nodded when Isabella made the correction sound like her own choice. A maid came to the door too soon with a tray. Bianca let her stand there a full 5 seconds before gesturing her in. The girl placed coffee and a slice of bread that was too fine to be food. Eat half. Thinking is sluggish when you are full. Isabella lifted the cup. The first sip tasted like something she could hold. Bianca watched her swallow. After breakfast, you will accompany your father. The city should see the shape of our contentment and recognize it as discipline. Do not blink too slowly in the car. It reads as boredom. I will look at the water. Water is honest. Do not let it into your eyes. Bianca left to punish someone else with taste. Isabella finished the coffee because it was hot, and the heat put a layer between her and the rest. In the mirror, the silver looked like surrender. She lifted the sketchbook again and sketched a small figure standing on a deck. Hair pulled back to keep it from getting in the way of the wind. The corridor carried the measured steps of guards rotating posts. In the foyer, the head of security spoke in low tones that carried because authority does not need volume. Isabella descended the stairs and watched men become furniture, and furniture become men. Cameras perched in corners like patient black seeds. One above the eastern arch was new. Its eye had no dust on it yet. The wire along the molding smiled in a 2 straight line, where it met the wall. Vittorio stood near the door with 2 men she had not been asked to learn yet. His attention weighted the space around him in the way of men who had never once had to wonder if they belonged where they stood. He glanced at Isabella, the way a ledger glances at a number. He was satisfied that it balanced. You will ride in the second car. Wave if a camera requires it. The head of security has increased coverage along the northern route. You will not look at the cameras. You will look like a person who does not know she is watched. Yes. Bianca crossed the marble and slid her hand under Isabella's elbow, as if choreographing a waltz. The touch was light and hard. If a reporter calls your name, you do not hear. If a woman compliments your dress, you accept. Only women. If a man compliments your dress, you do not encourage. A smile is encouragement. A smile with teeth is invitation. You are neither. Understood. The cars idled outside with their chrome mouths closed. The air had the smell of a day that could not decide between rain and glare. Isabella took her place in the second car because that was the place she had been assigned. The driver adjusted the mirror so that Luca's eyes could live there. He took the front passenger seat and let stillness wrap his shoulders like a jacket. The convoy moved through the gates and into a city that had been cleaned for daylight. She watched the sidewalks because that was where people carried their private lives. A woman walked a dog that looked like a piece of upholstery. A boy balanced coffee cups in a cardboard holder like he carried his exam results. The water arrived in framed views and slid away behind buildings. She didn't look for the florist and the bucket of roses. She did not want to teach her heart to expect red and then deny it twice in 1 week. Luca's gaze tracked the angles he had memorized yesterday and would memorize again tomorrow. He marked the second-floor balcony where a wind chime had been replaced with something that did not move. He watched a delivery truck mirror flash once, then twice, then sit dull. He did not turn to look at her. He did not need to. He adjusted the vent a fraction toward the back seat as if the air itself could be a kind of protection. Isabella let her hand rest on the leather seat where the light made a pale shape. She thought of the way the conservatory air had felt against her palm and made herself breathe in time with that memory. When the light paused at a long signal, she looked into the side mirror and met his eyes for a bare second. He didn't change anything. The second was enough to steady the part of her that had been trembling since the word alliance left her father's mouth the night before. The waterfront restaurant they used when they wanted to be seen had not had time to tire of its own reflection. Staff had been told to smile, and so they did. The manager held the door as if he were a minor god, and the act of opening were an offering made to him daily. Inside, the view made people forget to lower their voices when they discussed things that mattered in rooms that mattered more. Vittorio moved through it as if the floor had been designed around his step. Bianca broke the room into pieces and decided which to own. Isabella stood where she was placed and became part of the backdrop. A photographer outside the window lifted a camera and trapped the family in a rectangle. She did not meet the lens. She did not flinch when the manager complimented the cut of her dress with a smile meant for Bianca to approve. Bianca accepted the compliment as if she had sewn every stitch. The head of security spoke softly into his radio near the entrance and pointed a guard to a new position where a potted plant hid a blind corner. The guard obeyed with the eager stiffness of someone who had not yet learned how to look bored. Luca stationed himself where he could see both the glass and the kitchen door. When a waiter pushed through with a tray too full for comfort, Luca lifted a hand a quarter inch in a motion that meant slow down. The waiter did. Nothing spilled. Nobody clapped. Vittorio conducted 3 short conversations about charitable optics that ended in long conversations about schedules and shipments. Isabella watched the mouth of a glass and the way condensation left honest circles on linen. A woman at another table told a loud story designed to make strangers envy her. A child near the railing reached for a father's hand and was given it without question. The sight was a needle threaded straight through Isabella's chest and out of the other side. Bianca leaned close without appearing to. You are making the wrong face. People should envy you, not pity you. I will adjust. Do so before anyone notices. Isabella lifted the corners of her mouth by a scientifically precise degree and thought of the fig leaf in the conservatory that had accepted her touch without flinching. When they left, the manager poured compliments over them like sauce. The cameras outside took more rectangles. A woman called a question that did not require an answer and received none. On the way back, the convoy moved as if the city had been told to get out of the way. The head of security's car took a different route than the one they had used to arrive. The new camera on the north wall saw them before the guards at the gate did. Inside, the house shut its mouth over them like a trap, practiced in kindness. Vittorio disappeared into his study with a man who smelled like old money and fresh paper. Bianca went hunting for something to correct. The head of security briefed his men by the stairs in a voice pitched below casual conversation. Double checks at 4. The new lens at the arch reads clean. Anyone pauses at the east door, you note it. Anyone smiles at the staff for longer than courtesy, you note that too. Isabella took the east corridor because it was narrower and quiet, and because narrow and quiet felt like control. Luca fell into place at a distance that would read as appropriate on any camera, close enough that if she tripped over the hem of civility he could catch her without touching her. At the conservatory door she slowed a fraction, and then did not look at it at all. She did not need Bianca to ask why her eyes knew the weight and swing of a latch. Do you have to be everywhere? And I make a study of corners where there are many. I am patient. She kept walking. The line of portraits watched with practiced disdain. There was no frame where her mother's face should have been. She looked at the space anyway because refusal is a muscle that weakens if you do not work it. In the gallery, a maid dusted the edge of a table that never collected dust. Isabella paused when she came even with her. Thank you for the tea yesterday. The maid startled in her skin and then smiled a small, brave smile that would not show on a camera. I like making it strong. It feels like a choice. It was. The maid moved on before kindness could be blamed for anything. The head of security stepped into the gallery, scanned the positions, and wrote a note with his eyes. He looked at Isabella longer than usual, and then away again. That was warning and permission wrapped together. She continued to the stairs. At the landing, Bianca appeared as if conjured by the idea of disobedience. You will join me in the salon. There are taste decisions to make, and I need a body in the chair, so the florist understands the shape of the room. Of course, so you will not offer opinions. You will look like a person who has them and keeps them to herself because she understands how rooms work. Isabella sat where Bianca wanted and let flowers be held up against her face to judge color like a weapon. White made her look like surrender. Red made her look like she wanted something. Peach made Bianca say almost. The florist trembled in tasteful clothes and nodded at everything. Luca waited in the doorway and studied the movement of deliverymen, 2 rooms away through the reflection in a glass-fronted cabinet, because doors lie and reflections do not. The salon lasted an hour but took a year. When it ended, Bianca rewarded the florist by not being cruel in front of the maid who had carried the vases. She dismissed Isabella with a flick that indicated usefulness had been extracted. Go take air in the garden, not enough to leave marks on your cheeks. Thank you. Isabella crossed the marble toward the terrace with a guard trailing at the length that translated to obedience. The garden was trimmed to please the idea of nature Bianca carried in her head. Gravel lay flat where it should have sounded underfoot. Hedges held their breath and their shape. The conservatory glass caught the sky and made it a picture. Luca followed not because he wanted to walk but because the schedule had placed him there. When the guard veered off along the lower path to answer a radio call, Luca let his steps slow a fraction, so Isabella could keep her pace without making slowness look like a choice. You are breathing too high. You will faint for real if you keep it there. I will not give her the satisfaction. Then give yourself the air instead. She looked toward the conservatory and did not change direction. The ache under her ribs made a ring of heat. She pressed her hand against the bench back until the feeling receded and came back as anger. They added cameras overnight. They did. 1 at the arch, 2 on the northern wall, a new one under the eave that looks like a light. You notice things that matter. I am inventory. You are evidence that can learn. What would you have me learn? Patience, timing, the difference between doors that open and doors that open onto more walls. And hope. That too. A guard appeared at the upper path and gave Luca a look that asked a question without a word. Luca answered by not moving. The guard kept going. Isabella exhaled slowly once and let her shoulders drop the width of a coin. Bianca's voice traveled from the terrace like silk pulled over a blade. Isabella. Isabella turned without hurrying. Bianca held a small envelope with a note card peeking out. She extended it as if offering a gift to a pet. You will copy this by hand in your own words. Practice a gracious response to congratulations. Do not overthink. Brains are not charming on paper. I will write it now. Good, and smile less at staff. It makes people think you can be reached. Bianca drifted back inside. The envelope was heavier than it should have been. Isabella kept her face still until the doors closed behind the woman, and the glass returned her reflection to her. Luca's voice reached her at the distance that left no track. Do not let them change the way you treat people. I am trying not to let them change my face. Let the plants change it when they need to, not Bianca. You give instructions as if they are physics. Sometimes they are. She went back inside with the envelope and the feeling that the air belonged to her for 10 counted breaths a day, and those breaths could be made into a rope if she learned where to tie it. The house shifted around her with the hour. Trays appeared and disappeared. Voices fell and rose according to whose shoes were on which side of the doors. Vittorio's steps approached from the study. She turned to meet them, because it was easier than being met. He looked at her and did not soften, not because he did not love, but because he had replaced love with a larger thing and expected everyone else to be relieved. He gestured, and the corridor emptied itself of witnesses. There will be a rehearsal dinner for the gala. You will wear the blue. Do not misspeak. Do not improvise. I understand. He studied her for a tell that would cost something and found none. He moved on. The head of security reappeared as if summoned by the motion of power. North cameras hold. East blind spot at 4 remains. We tighten staff movement between 3 and 6. No one crosses the kitchen threshold without a mark on the sheet. Luca's gaze did not flicker toward Isabella because discipline protects the right things in public. She walked away with the envelope, and the image of rain stuck to glass, waiting to make a decision. In her room, she sat at the vanity and copied Bianca's sentiment until it looked like it belonged to her hand. She made the letters neat. She did not let a single word sound like a plea. When she finished, she took the sketchbook and slid it into the bed frame where the wood had warped just enough to hold secrets. She pressed her palm to the mattress above it and felt the quiet beat against her skin, like a second heart. The house hummed, and the day gathered itself for the next performance. She looked at the door that stuck, and the window that did not open, and told herself again that the plant had been warm where she touched it. She could build a road out of that if she learned to walk it without making a sound. Afternoon settled over the salon like a polished smile. Men took seats as if chairs were thrones and glasses were contracts. Staff flowed around them with quiet precision. Bianca stood in the doorway, rings bright, and turned to Isabella with a card pinched between two fingers. You will host 1 drink per guest, names correct, distance correct, smile like a person who understands rooms. Isabella took the silver tray from a maid whose hands were too cold and began the circuit. The first guest, a banker with a color that did not belong to this city, reached for a flute before she offered it. Your father raises the bar every year. We are grateful for your confidence. The second guest, younger and eager, let his eyes rest where they should not, and remembered himself too late. Congratulations in advance. Thank you for joining us. A third man with pale irises and a paper name accepted a drink and made her stand a moment longer, with a tilt of his chin that asked for more than courtesy. Guards posted at the corners watched the air for mistakes. The head of security drifted the edges with a radio close to his mouth. Luca took the north post where the salon opened to a side hall, attention on thresholds and reflections in the frame of a landscape. Isabella turned from the pale-eyed man and met Luca's gaze for a breath. It landed like a hand on her back, steadying the part that had started to shake. Bianca waited until the tray felt heavier than it should before tightening the leash. Bring Signor Bellini a whiskey. Neat. Then stand to my right. He should see what he is congratulating. Isabella poured with a hand that refused to tremble, carried the glass across the rug and offered it. Bellini let his fingers touch hers longer than necessary. Your father is a fortunate man. We are fortunate to have loyal friends. His mouth made a small satisfied shape. Bianca stepped half a pace and claimed the space with practiced ease. Loyalty is exhausting when it is not shared. We prefer to spend it carefully. Then you will like what we are offering, he said, and lifted his glass toward Vittorio, a toast that did not rise high enough to attract a camera. Isabella stood at Bianca's side while the room learned its next shape. The maid with the small tray of salted nuts passed close, eyes down, shoulders tight. Isabella steadied the edge with 2 fingers as if guarding balance, and the maid's breath relaxed for 1 second before training returned. Across the carpet, Vittorio's circle condensed and widened as schedules disguised themselves as jokes. The head of security angled his body to see a doorway and a window at once. Luca listened to the hallway, and to the glass, and to a sound outside that did not repeat. Bianca's voice fell to a tone that pretended privacy while inviting witnesses. Isabella, thank our guests for their attention. Your presence honors us. Elegant, murmured the pale-eyed man. You have trained her well. Training is love with a purpose, Bianca replied, and laid 2 fingers on Isabella's wrist like affection while measuring the pulse beneath her skin. The room loosened by degrees. The banker told a story where the cost was the punchline. The eager young man laughed too loudly. Isabella stood until standing became an act that ached. When the last glass emptied, Bianca flicked a hand and staff swept in to erase evidence. She kept her voice bright enough for a guard to hear. Take the empty bottles to the sideboard, no clinking, desperation clinks. Isabella gathered 2 in each hand. The eager young man stepped half into her path, a smile trying to be charming and failing. His eyes landed where eyes should not. She stopped without stepping back. Luca moved 2 paces without looking like he moved. The head of security's presence swelled in the doorway. The young man laughed at himself and offered a pantomime of apology. Isabella passed and set the bottles down without a sound. When she straightened, Luca was studying the glass, not her. Gratitude rose and she swallowed it because thanks could be used against both of them. The salon exhaled its guests one by one. As the last pair of expensive shoes crossed the threshold, Bianca folded her smile away. Competent. Do not confuse competence with accomplishment. Pride is loud. I will remember. See that you do. Your father wants you. Vittorio's study was a room that taught sunlight manners. He stood by the window with a man whose suit fit like an order. Papers lay on the desk in 3 neat stacks. He did not invite Isabella to sit. You will attend a fitting this evening. This evening. The dressmakers work better when you choose quickly. Bianca will assist. Bianca perched on an armrest like a decorative cat with teeth. She examined Isabella's posture. Do not bring opinions, bring your spine. When is the ceremony? Soon, Vittorio said. How soon? 3 weeks, Bianca answered, satisfaction smooth in the phrase. The date is auspicious and the port agrees. 3 weeks fell into Isabella like a stone. She pictured a calendar and felt the square turn into a closing door. She kept her voice clear. I understand. You obey, Vittorio corrected. You exist because you obey. She inclined her head a degree. The man in the perfect suit smiled without teeth. Papers did not move. The meeting ended as neatly as it began. Outside, the corridor returned air to its previous composition. A guard at the corner lifted his chin in reflexive respect. Isabella walked to the bend, stepped into the narrow alcove with the nailed window, and put her back to the wall. Heat pricked her eyes, then withdrew. 3 weeks turned circles behind her ribs. Footsteps carried from the other direction and stopped just beyond the angle. Do not speak if it makes it harder. I need to put it somewhere. Put it here for a moment. She let the breath go, not as sound, as surrender of tightness. Luca stayed on his side of the corner, a voice that belonged to the air. They moved the clock for money. I know. They will increase your escort, reduce your errand time. Call it care. I know. Use their rhythm, be seen, be predictable, learn at the same time. How to run without moving. Exactly. 2 guards came by with a crate and a conversation that ended the moment they saw bodies. They passed. The corridor regained its hush. Tonight is fitting, then dinner, he said. You sleep with your shoes by the bed. You think I will have to run. I think you deserve the choice, Mur. I am forgetting and remembering every minute. That is the work. She turned her head so his outline became a person instead of a suggestion. 3 weeks. 2 in days if you count like a thief. I want to. You will. They separated before the head of security rounded the corner. His eyes wrote notes he did not take. Patrol change in 10, East door stays watched. Miss Romano, dinner at 8. Thank you. He moved on. Luca dissolved into the machinery. Isabella lifted her chin to the degree Bianca considered modest confidence and made for the wardrobe wing. The fitting was a play with needles. Dressmakers swarmed, hands busy, mouths careful. Bianca watched with a glass she did not drink. Lower your shoulders. She did. The bodice bit. A seamstress tugged and eased. Isabella walked the length of the rug. The skirt moved like a body that belonged to someone else. She turned once and let the wave of light-headedness pass without notice. Height is persuasive, Bianca murmured. Own it even if you borrow it. A young seamstress pricked her finger and hid the hiss. Bright blood welled. Isabella wrapped the fingertip in a cloth with practiced efficiency. The girl's eyes filled with gratitude and caution. Thank you. Careful. Bianca snapped at the room, replaced the needle. They stripped the dress away and left a constellation of impressions on Isabella's skin. Mariella appeared at the door with the blue chosen for the evening. Bianca stood and circled once, appraising a statue she had commissioned. It will do. May I sit in it? You will be allowed to appear. In the hall, the house changed key. Voices thinned. Radios clicked and quieted. A cart rolled past with polished silver like moons. Isabella took the service stairs because the air there smelled like soap and metal, not decisions. At the bottom she paused. Voices bled from the short hall outside the study. She almost retreated, then went on because moving backward invited someone else to choose for her. Bianca first, velvet over iron. Earlier is better, faster closes doors behind us. Vittorio, smooth as policy. We accelerate when advantage peaks. We have it, his men are hungry, he wants the parade, he wants the port. 3 weeks invites questions. 2 invites mistakes, I do not make them. Let me make the dress look like the answer to every question. Silence that weighed pride against strategy. Paperwork tomorrow, Vittorio concluded. Formal announcement in 10 days. She will not breathe this house without a shadow. Her guard rotation must tighten, Bianca added. And the new one, the gray-eyed one. Remove him, he notices. He is useful. Tolerance grows weakness. Not here. The door shut the rest behind wood that had heard worse. Isabella pressed her palms to the wall. 10 days flew at her and would not slow down. She lifted her hands, made them behave, and walked on, back into the corridor where work gave staff better things to see than fear. At the turn, Luca stepped from a narrower passage and almost passed. He stopped by the length of a breath. His eyes measured color, air, and the opening and closing of her hand. They moved it. 10 days. He did not curse. He did not flinch. Good, less time to be afraid. That is what you call this. A measurement, it changes nothing. What do we do? You eat something even if it tastes like paper. You sit at dinner. You let the clock be your friend. Later you move your shoes to the foot of the bed. Why the shoes? So you do not burn for want of leather. I will not sleep. You will. Exhaustion always wins the first round. We do not let it win the second. Her hand lifted toward the wall again. She stopped it mid-air. He shifted an inch, not closer, not away. Your face is not ready for dinner. I know. Look at me. She did. The corridors and doors receded. His eyes balanced between storm and water and chose water for her. Air moved lower. Her ribs allowed it. She leaned the smallest measure in his direction, stopped before it could become admission. Better. You should not be seen with me. I am everywhere. The head of security wants you gone. He wants any piece he does not control gone. It is a hobby. He will win. Not today. Footsteps sent them in opposite directions at a normal pace. Isabella climbed to the main hall, hands quiet, face composed. At the landing, the head of security waited like a closed book. Dinner, 8. I'm on my way. He watched her turn the corner, then looked down the corridor where Luca had been and filed the timing away for later. Dinner rehearsed power in smaller bites than the night before. The usual people enjoyed eating in a room where decisions had already been made. Vittorio spoke sparingly. When he did, the air adjusted. Bianca laughed twice on cue. Isabella moved her fork and lifted her glass and performed the motions that looked like living. At the wall, Luca was part of the architecture. The head of security moved once when a tray knocked a chair and returned to stillness. Between courses, Vittorio addressed the table like giving the hour. Family appreciates loyalty. A celebration will be announced. Details will arrive. Glasses lifted because hands need tasks when words land. Bianca glanced at Isabella, checking angles. Radiant, she murmured, letting the word float where it could be heard. When plates cleared and voices softened, Isabella stood at the fringe and let the hum wash over her. She could feel Luca behind her without turning. She could feel Bianca's attention like a pin pressed near skin. She could feel the number 10 ticking in the walls as if the house itself had learned to count. Back in her room, the blue lay across a chair like a wave that had lost interest. Mariella brought a robe and fastened it gently. They are shortening the days, Isabella whispered, and I heard. Do you ever wish the walls could melt? Only when I carry soup. The almost laugh helped. Mariella smoothed a ribbon that did not need it. "Shoes by the bed," she said quietly, naming a thought that had already found the room. "I will." When she was alone, Isabella placed the shoes where her feet would find them without thinking. She opened the sketchbook and drew a page without numbers, only lines that left the square and refused to return. She drew a hinge and a hand steady enough to pull left, then up. She closed the book and listened to the leaves in the conservatory remember the day. Somewhere beyond the stone, the sea she had never seen argued with a shore she had never touched. She breathed and made the number smaller by the size of one heartbeat. Night folded over the house until the windows showed only the room looking back. Isabella sat on the floor beside the bed with her knees pulled up, the robe cinched tight, the sketchbook open on the rug. Lines came without planning, a coastline refusing to be boxed in, a door pressing against its frame, a figure small as a thumbprint standing where land met water. She drew the hinge thinner, then pressed the pencil until the paper dented. The number 10 pulsed behind her eyes like a lantern cupped and uncovered by a hand. She slid the sketchbook under the bowed plank of the bed frame, stood and faced herself in the glass. The face in the mirror had learned a calm that did not belong to peace. She pressed her palms to the vanity and kept still until the shaking retreated. A pipe clicked in the wall. Somewhere below, a cart trundled over tile and hushed itself. A guard's radio popped once like a small spark and went quiet. A soft knock came, 2 beats, a pause, 1 beat. Not staff, not Bianca. She went to the peephole and saw only a shoulder, a dark jacket, the edge of a jaw. She didn't open the door. "Who?" "North Watch. I'm walking the floor." "I'm fine." "You're allowed not to be." The words rested against the wood without pushing. She lifted the chain and opened the door 2 inches. Luca stayed just outside the cone of her lamp, the corridor empty behind him except for a runner that swallowed steps. "Do you want air?" "The conservatory." No cameras inside the glass, only in the corridor. She slipped her feet into the shoes she had placed by the bed and wrapped a shawl around her shoulders. He stepped back to give her the hallway and fell into step without looking at her. The guard at the far end didn't turn. The head of security's voice murmured from another floor, a note about posts and timing that did not belong to this corridor. At the conservatory door, she set her fingers on the latch and remembered the rule. Left, then up. The latch relented with a small pride. Warmth breathed out at them, carrying earth and green, and the patient scent leaves make when they remember their work. She moved under the fig in the corner and stood as if visiting a friend who knew how to listen. "I kept it together at dinner." "You did?" "I wanted to put my head on the table and sleep for a month." "That means you're doing it right. Will you get in trouble for this?" "I'm walking the floor." He stayed near the path, hands at his sides, never crossing lines even when no one would see. A bead of water gathered along a leaf and fell with a soft tap that felt like permission. She let her shoulders drop and felt the ache around her ribs loosen. "They said 10 days. I heard. They want you removed." "I heard that too." "Will they?" "Maybe. Not tonight." "Why help me?" "Because the right things should be protected." "What if I'm not one of the right things?" "You are." Her hand moved like an idea toward his sleeve and stopped an inch short, a bird deciding about a windowsill. He didn't close the inch. The space felt like a kind of faith. "Tell me something that isn't this." "Basil in hot water smells like Saturday." "Basil." "And rain on stone smells like a promise that hasn't decided if it wants to keep itself." "You carry strange comforts." "I remember the ones that worked." A laugh slipped out, small and real. Breath returned. She touched a leaf and let it spring back. "I won't survive this if I stay a statue." "You won't stay one." "How do you know?" "You notice angles, you count cameras, you tie your hair without the mirror. You're learning how to move without making the air ripple." "Is it enough?" "It starts to be." Footsteps passed in the corridor, unhurried. He turned his head toward the sound, then eased when it faded. Tomorrow they'll rehearse you again. I know. They'll shorten errands and call it grace. Bianca always does. He turned one palm up at his side, not offering, not asking. She set her fingers there for a breath and lifted them away. Nothing and everything together. Go back before the corridor notices it missed you for 4 minutes. I will. He opened the door and cool air touched her face like a truth. They walked without touching, unhurried. The guard at the far end glanced and saw only shapes in their places. At her door, Luca stopped a stride short and became furniture again. You'll sleep. I'll try. You will. You're tired enough. She slipped inside and leaned her weight against the wood until the beat in her throat steadied. In the mirror, she looked like a person who had stood near something that didn't hurt. She folded the shawl with care and lay on the bed without loosening the belt. Sleep came in tides, enough to blur edges, not enough to wash anything away. Morning gathered carefully. The long table gleamed. 2 guards stood by the doors like carved warnings. Vittorio read the paper and let silence do the speaking until Isabella sat. Bianca sipped water that tasted expensive and invisible. Engagement dinner is scheduled, Vittorio said. Messages will go out. Of course. You will greet, you will not converse. I understand. Understanding is nothing without doing. You will not make me explain you to anyone. Bianca set her glass down with a quiet click. Posture. Isabella straightened. The corset enforced compliance. Bianca surveyed the cutlery as if planning a battle. You will try on rings this afternoon. Don't swell your fingers with useless emotion. I will manage. You will manage because you must. Vittorio folded the paper and slid it aside. There are meetings. You will be visible as long as necessary, no longer. We are pleased. We are prepared. Bianca approved of the difference with a small lift of her mouth. The morning moved around her like a tide she could neither stop nor turn. Staff kept their eyes brief and neutral. Kindness swallowed before it could reach the air. Mariella found her by the wardrobe with 3 boxes and hands warm enough to be a mercy. They want to see your hands. They will see them. Keep them warm. Rings behave on warm fingers. I don't like rings. You don't have to. Mariella cupped Isabella's hands between her own for a moment, then adjusted a sleeve to explain the touch if anyone asked. Isabella held her breath until the burn backed away. The head of security steps came and went like changes in weather. The jeweler arrived with a briefcase that knew how to look trustworthy. Bianca placed Isabella near a window so stones could have their theater. Rings appeared on velvet like small planets. Bianca said almost 3 times and then yes. Hold out your hand. Isabella did. The ring slid on with quiet insistence. It sat there like a decision. Bianca watched her face. Try another size. It fits. Try another size. The jeweler tried and failed to improve on inevitability. The chosen ring remained the answer. Bianca nodded. Bring it for polishing. The man packed away the planets and left the brightest one behind. It rested in a small box like a tidy anchor. Bianca left it open on purpose and dismissed the room with the sigh of someone pleased with an arrangement. Isabella stepped into the corridor where the portraits ended and the plain wall began. The space where her mother's face should have been held only paint and chill. She set her palm there anyway. Luca approached from the far end, the pace of a man who did not have to hurry to be on time. They chose the ring. They chose everything. You accept what you can't change so you can change what you can. I know what I am in this. You're a person inside a machine. Machines crush people. Not if they jam at the right time. She breathed and the number pressed against her ribs like a coin being counted. Tonight will be worse. I expect it. Expectation helps. It only softens the surprise when pain arrives. Then we make other things bigger. Like what? Tea that's too strong, leaf against glass, basil in hot water, shoes by the bed. You sound like a priest. I sound like someone who has watched people survive. She wanted to touch his sleeve again and didn't. The head of security turned the corner with a file and paused because pausing is power. Patrols rotate in 5, east door locks early. Miss Romano, rehearsal at 6. Thank you. He looked at Luca a fraction longer than he looked at her and moved on. The heir went back to pretending it noticed nothing. The afternoon rehearsed her into a polished strain. She practiced a smile that invited no conversation and refused none. Bianca pinned swatches against her skin without asking whether she had skin to begin with. Carts rolled over carpets that had been taught silence. Luca ceased to be visible and so confirmed he was near. Dinner gathered people who liked eating where decisions had already been made. The table shone. The head of security took a place near the sideboard that let him see everything without appearing to watch. Luca stood where he could intercept mess without implying any might occur. Vittorio lifted a glass. You will hear a date in the next days, he told the table. Grace is appreciated. Discipline has rewards. Bianca let a smile trail down the length of the table toward Isabella like a ribbon. Joy looks better when it is quiet. A guest leaned toward Isabella. Congratulations. Thank you for your kindness. May it be a long happiness. It will be what it is meant to be. Plates changed. Glasses filled and talk filled the spaces where choices had been sealed elsewhere. When the meal eased apart into clusters, Vittorio intercepted Isabella near the doorway. He did not touch her. In the next days you will be gracious whenever required. You will answer at once. You will spare me the error of explaining you. I understand. You will also close your sketchbook. Childhood ends when duty begins. I draw to think. You will not need to think. Bianca appeared like the end of a sentence. She will be lovely. She will be obedient. They moved away together, satisfied. Isabella stood with her back to the cool paneling until her throat let air through. Across the room, Luca watched a waiter adjust a candle and missed nothing. A maid passed with a tray that smelled of lemon, eyes careful not to meet any others for too long. Later, alone again, she opened the sketchbook in disobedience and drew her mother's face until it blurred into light. She drew a gate with a hinge and an arrowed motion, a figure stepping through and another a step behind, turned slightly as if watching the path they had taken without regret. She slid the book under the bed frame and stood in the dim. The window was black glass until it found her reflection. She touched the pane and felt the night press back. Not hostile, simply present. Somewhere beyond, the sea she had never seen argued with a shore she had never touched. The number dropped smaller by the size of a breath. She spoke into the room because air keeps secrets better than walls. I will run. The sentence did not echo. It held. Her knees trembled and then steadied. She sat on the bed and pulled the shoes closer until her toes brushed leather. The house's hum changed by the smallest note, as if it too had heard the decision and adjusted. The soft knock returned, the same pattern as before. Are you awake? Yes. Good. What happens now? Now you sleep. Tomorrow you repeat the pattern. Quiet underneath, ordinary on top. When there is a gap, I'll make it bigger. When there is a door, I'll be at it. Will you always be there? I'll be there when it counts. Thank you. You're not alone. She set her palm to the wood. The words warmed the room and stayed. She turned off the lamp and lay back without undressing. In the dark, the pale outline of her shoes waited like two small promises. Her heart learned a new rhythm, not panic, not surrender. Forward. Sleep came by inches. When it found her, it carried the smell of basil and rain on stone, the feel of a leaf under her hand, the motion of a latch that would open if she pulled left and then up, and a coastline that was no longer borrowed but hers. Morning arrived in thin pieces. Light easing around the curtains, a pipe knocking once in the wall, a cart whispering along the corridor. Isabella kept still and let the house come awake without her. The vow she made in the dark felt like a new bone under her ribs. It changed the way her feet found the floor, The way her fingers touched the brush, the way air moved in and out of her chest. She opened the curtains an inch. The courtyard held a silver film of morning. Guards traded posts at the gate with the quiet focus of men carrying crystal. Near the north wall, Luca adjusted a camera by a degree and checked the angle, with the calm of someone who trusted his eyes. He glanced toward the east wing windows once, a movement so small it could have been the morning checking the time. It still found her. She stepped back before the house could call it longing. A soft knock. Mariella slipped in with a dress that had learned how not to offend. Warm hands, quick hooks, the corset taking what it always took. Mariella eased a finger under the laces when the camera in the corner faced the window, a stolen breath that didn't show on film. Isabella touched her wrist in thanks, then released it before gratitude could be used as evidence. Madame prefers the ash blue for daylight, and I know. Powder, not color, thank you. Mariella smoothed a seam that did not need smoothing and left without disturbing the hallway. Downstairs, the foyer already hummed. Vittorio spoke to two men whose suits fit like math. The head of security murmured into his radio with the assurance of a man who expected obedience across rooms he could not see. Bianca crossed the marble, as if the floor had been practicing for her. One glance at Isabella's face, and she had an instruction. You slept. Erase it. I will correct my expression. Do not correct, remove. Bianca threaded her hand under Vittorio's arm, and the pair moved as if gravity obeyed them. Staff adjusted distances the way water adjusts around stone. Breakfast performed itself in tidy strokes. Vittorio listed meetings like weather. Bianca annotated with lighting and lists, and a tone that made caterers obey through walls. Isabella lifted her cup, set it down, let her mouth soften, in the right places. She felt a new lens in the north arch tracking every angle. The head of security issued positions in a voice that never needed to rise. North terrace covered, east corridor tight. Miss Romano does not move alone. The words settled over her like a second dress. She stood when chairs slid back and became part of the still life the foyer liked to mirror. Escort, garden, then gallery. Keep positions. Luca fell in behind her at the distance that announced obedience and felt like balance. The garden air was green and cool, the gravel hush practiced under shoes that had never been asked to run. Isabella didn't look at him. Looking bent the lines that kept them both alive. But she counted his steps even when she told herself not to. The rhythm matched a place in her chest that had nothing to do with fear. Extra eyes at the lower gate, he said softly, voice belonging to the leaves. The blind spot by the ivy wall is smaller. Do not linger there. You mapped it last night, and I mapped it when I arrived. Last night they changed it. I checked the changes, and who decided? Men who confuse cages with safety. Does it work? It keeps the timid out. Storms walk through doors. They paused outside the conservatory. The glass wore sky like a secret. Her fingers rose a fraction and hovered over the latch. Morning did not belong to privacy. She let her palm find the stone ledge instead. Cold inked her skin. You have graphite on your thumb, and I know. Keep it. Why? Because glass breaks and paper keeps the mark. A smile tried the corner of her mouth and left no imprint the cameras could use. Far down the path, a guard turned to check a line and turned back. Luca matched her when she moved on. If you are forced to stand by a window later, angle your shoulder to the glass. Reflections behind you are mouths you cannot close. Are we going out? You are always being taken somewhere. She touched the bench with two fingers, a toll of courage, and kept walking. A maid cut roses along the lower path, eyes down, hands brisk. Isabella wanted to use the girl's name and didn't. Names traveled faster than kindness. On the landing, Bianca waited with a folder pressed to her ribs like a verdict. Practice now. Practice what? Smile and obedience. We will rehearse the part where you stop reading as a person and begin reading as the answer other people paid for. The salon had been rearranged for performance. A chair faced a ribbon of carpet. 3 small cards waited on a silver tray. The head of security took the doorway. 2 guards posted to corners and became decorative. Luca placed himself where door and window both fit in one eye. Bianca handed Isabella the first card. You will accept congratulations without letting your eyes search for exits. Your mouth will thank people who do not deserve thanks. Congratulations. Thank you for your kindness. You will be happy. I will be what I am meant to be. Less poetry again. They ran it 3 times until the words lost taste. Luca did not move. Air needled Isabella's temples. Bianca handed the second card. You will not remind men of debt when they speak the word future. You will be photogenic humility. Isabella let a smile rise and fall like a trained wave. Better. Turn as if someone with steel money and no patience has been placed in front of you. She turned. The dress tugged at her ribs. The room tilted a degree. The card slipped. It would have hit the carpet if Luca had not moved in a way that refused to register as movement. He caught it, and in the same breath his fingers found her elbow. Heat and steadiness passed through skin to bone. He withdrew before attention could land. Thank you. It was not a whisper so much as a breath with shape. Bianca noticed and did not reveal it. Again. Balance this time as if you made a promise to yourself. Isabella repeated the motion and her body obeyed. When Bianca dismissed her with a flick, Isabella felt as if someone had made a statue demonstrate grace. Change. The ash blue reads as apology in photographs. The afternoon will prefer strength. Do not eat until rehearsal. Food dulls. Isabella nodded because refusal was a door Bianca loved to slam. Luca dropped a pace behind her in the corridor, an ordinary shadow with its own decisions. The head of security radioed a note about the stairwell, and 2 men moved like chess pieces set by habit. In her room, Mariella worked in the hush of a person who knew which silence kept people safe. The dress that had looked like surrender slid off. A clean line replaced it, the hem a whisper higher. It makes walking look chosen, Mariella said as she pinned. Only the right eyes notice. Will those eyes be kind? If they are not, they will pretend. Mariella's fingertips lingered on Isabella's shoulder the way a mother would in a crowd, a touch too small to be punished. Then she stepped back into role. The corridor held polite friction, carts and footsteps and the suggestion of lemon oil. Isabella walked to the gallery because the lens demanded it. Portraits looked unimpressed by both time and her. At the far window, a draft found her face. She stood a second longer than the house preferred. Luca spoke without turning. If they put you by glass later, put your weight on the foot closest to the exit. You will breathe better. Breathing is not part of the plan, then make it look like posture. A maid with a basket of linen clipped a hip on the table edge. Isabella steadied the stack, then withdrew her hand before the camera could accuse her of having one. The maid's mouth made a small thank you and remembered not to hold it. The morning became doors opening before her hand reached them. She moved as required through foyer, sitting room, the corridor where painted flowers never drooped. Luca mapped shadows and stood where trouble would start if it decided today was the day. For the first time, she felt the house share the air with her instead of taking it. Bianca found them again before noon with a garment bag and a schedule. Dress after lunch, photographs tomorrow. The ring returns at 4. Practice not blinking when it is placed in front of men who practice not looking away from worse things in wartime. The sentence left small cuts. Isabella folded the pane into a neat square and put it where it would not spill. Lunch was a pause pretending to be food. Water tasted like something had been added to remove fear. The early afternoon tightened. Staff moved faster without looking hurried. The head of security stationed 2 men at a door that existed to reassure people that doors could be guarded. Vittorio crossed the corridor with the weight of someone the house wanted to applaud. His look slid over Isabella and made a calculation he did not share. Be ready by 5. We respect time by being early. Of course. He did not notice that her hands had stopped wanting to tremble. That victory was not for him. For an hour she sat on the edge of the bed and pressed her palm to the hidden sketchbook. She didn't open it. Touch made a promise she wanted to keep. When she rose, she felt located inside her own body. At 5, she crossed the foyer toward the salon again. Guards stood where safety could be staged. Bianca was a dark edge by the window. Luca watched the side corridor where reflections told the truth the room liked to hide. "You are 1 minute early," Bianca said, approving as if scolding. "Begin with entrances. Cross the carpet without getting wet." Isabella walked. Fabric brushed her shins. She let the room arrange itself around her without letting it claim her. Bianca raised a hand and stopped her an inch before perfect. Again. "Leave a breath between what the room expects and what you allow." She did. Luca's attention touched her a second like a palm offered across a gap. The head of security looked up and then away, a question asked and answered in one blink. "Congratulations, thank you for your kindness, and you will be very happy. I will be what I am meant to be, and less tragedy." Again. They ran the script until the air thinned. On the last turn, her heel snagged a pattern in the carpet. Her weight pitched. Luca crossed the space before gravity could win and closed his hand around her forearm. Warmth and steadiness. His fingers lingered the length of a heartbeat that stretched. "Careful." "I am." Bianca watched as if she'd planned the moment for effect. "We are done for now. Learn to glide without the thought of falling. People do not forgive fear." Isabella held Luca's gaze the fraction longer that turns into a promise only two people can hear. She left with a poise that had been wired into her bones. In the hall, a radio clicked and sent 2 guards to a door that never misbehaved. A maid passed with lilies and inhaled as if scent could be armor. On the way back to her room, Isabella paused at the narrow alcove with the nailed window. Cold glass gave her nothing but its own refusal. She laid fingers there anyway and thought of leaves in warm air, basil in a chipped mug, rain on stone. The memory felt like a weight she could lean against. The afternoon looped and folded. She changed. She stood. She spoke the lines until the words were smooth stones in her mouth. Each time she finished, she found Luca at the edge of the frame, a constant line in the room's geometry. By the time the light thinned at the windows, her heels made no sound she did not choose. At the threshold, Bianca lifted a hand like a conductor. "Before dinner, you will practice 3 phrases that require no thought. Ready. Ready. My family is grateful. Grateful, we are honored by your presence. Honored. Our future is bright. Bright. Better. Keep this and you might avoid frightening people by wanting something." Isabella turned toward the east wing. The air cooled the way rooms do when they drop the performance and return to themselves. Luca stepped from a doorway in the same breath she did, as if the house had lined them up by accident or design. They stopped a breath apart. "Eat," he said quietly. "Bread, at least. I am allowed a small piece. Take 2 if they are small. No one counts crumbs." Laughter rose and she pushed it down before it could turn dangerous. Warmth stayed. "Thank you for catching me, and that was the easiest task I had today." The answer moved through her with the same certainty as her vow. They stood in the kind of silence people use when nothing is safe to say and too much is true. A guard turned the corner, and the moment closed like a book. Back in her room, she unhooked the small fastenings and invited air all the way in. The mirror showed a woman who had not fallen when gravity asked her to. Across the courtyard, a man at a post adjusted a camera by a degree as if the day needed that small correction to end well. Evening tested doors and declared them locked. Isabella sat on the bed and touched the place on her arm where his hand had been. Warmth remained, a mark no eye could punish. Somewhere a maid laughed and swallowed the sound like a secret. The house resumed its steady work of pretending to be inevitable. By mid-afternoon, the house moved like a wound-up music box. Florists slid buckets across tile, leaving small crescents of water that vanished on cue. A rental crew measured the terrace with tapes that flicked and snapped, counting distance as if counting mattered more than people. The kitchen breathed steam and citrus. Up the back stairs, a cart of glass hurricanes shivered as it turned, each globe wrapped like a fragile secret. Staff crossed paths without colliding, all of them listening for Bianca's step the way sailors listen for weather. Isabella stepped from her room and met the quiet of the upper floor, a hush that wrapped the throat before it asked permission. 2 guards waited at the landing with that particular blankness that means attention. The head of security's voice drifted from somewhere below, dividing the day into routes and angles. She moved toward the eastern arch. Luca stood there as if the house had been designed around the space he left in it. He acknowledged the posted guards with almost nothing and turned his focus to the corridor that led to rehearsal. They walked without touching, the speed of people who intend to look unhurried because the house teaches that unhurried is innocent. The public hallway narrowed where a delivery team blocked half the way with a crate of lanterns. Luca tipped his chin toward the service passage. Cool tile, lemon cleaner, the breath of the building's lungs. The hall swallowed their footsteps. For a dozen lengths of tile they had no witnesses but light and dust. You are walking like the day weighs more than you do. It does. How much? Enough to change how my feet understand floors. 20 breaths. Now. In through your nose for 4. Hold 2. Out 6. The first cycle snagged on the corset. The second opened a notch inside her chest. The third put an inch between her heart and the nearest wall. Better. It still hurts? It should. Better and hurting can happen together. They paused at the corner where the service hall fed back into the public corridor. A tall mirror cut their reflections at the knees. A small curl had escaped near Isabella's temple. She lifted a hand, then remembered the way hands are watched. Luca reached instead, slow enough to be refused, steady enough to be accepted. He smoothed the curl behind her ear with his knuckles, not his fingertips, a touch so light it could be mistaken for air. Heat lasted far longer than the movement. You'll be watched closer today. I feel eyes when there are none. Train yours to be polite in return, they'll forget at the right time. A busboy pushed through the far door with a tray of clean glasses. Eyes down, breath too fast. The moment folded itself and slipped into the seam of ordinary. They rejoined the main hall, just as Bianca's heels whispered toward the salon. On time, Bianca said, pleased in a way that sharpened. Let us remove the last of your accidents. The salon had been reset since morning. A narrow carpet ran toward a chair polished to look like comfort. On a side table, a case lay open on velvet, the ring returned from its polish and blinking with hard light. Bianca stood beside it with 2 fingers on the lid, ranges of lilies flanking her like obedient witnesses. Again, entrances, gratitude, stillness, your eyes will not announce private opinions. I have none left. You always have one left, we will bury it. The head of security took his place where he could see the door and a reflection of the window at the same time. Guards fitted themselves into corners like punctuation. Isabella walked the runner. The sound of her heels turned into a metronome. Fabric slid along her legs in practiced strokes. Bianca offered the lines. Congratulations. Thank you for your kindness. You will be very happy. I will be what I am meant to be. Less weight. Again. They ran the phrases until Isabella's mouth could carry them without her mind standing beside each word. Bianca lifted the ring with tweezers, turned it so the light could find corners, and held out the other hand for Isabella's left. Breathe without moving your shoulders. Isabella extended her hand. The ring touched her skin and cooled it, then slid to the knuckle, tested the joint, and settled with a soft insistence. A little cold climbed her wrist like a story that preferred being told in the dark. Eyes do not blink. Isabella found the window and held. In 4, hold 2, out 6. The head of security watched the mirror and watched the door and did not blink either. Acceptable, Bianca decided. If you maintain that, people will mistake it for grace. Vittorio entered as if the room had been waiting for him to give it permission to be itself. His presence shifted the temperature by a degree. He went first to Isabella's hand, then to her face, measuring whether the ring altered either. Good. Wear it. I will wear it. You will carry it, he corrected. Words are tools. Use the right one. Bianca closed the case with a click that felt like a seal. She turned to the head of security. Tomorrow, journalists. Tonight we ration access. No photographs. We control appetite. Understood? Luca studied lines the others did not have to think about. The way Vittorio half-angled toward the nearest exit. The way Bianca claimed space by seeming to need less of it. The guard placed where a gilded mirror would capture anyone approaching from behind. Isabella felt it as pressure through the soles of her shoes. The weight of a house that had learned to press without leaving bruises. Rehearsal dinner, Vittorio said. We make the announcement then. The public version follows days after. How many? Fewer than you think, Bianca answered. Efficiency flatters the story. Expensive, Vittorio murmured. Paid in advance. He was already turning away. The meeting ended simply because he decided it had. The room rearranged itself around his absence. Again, Bianca said. And the day obeyed. By the time the light had tilted toward gold at the windows, staff slid in with water that tasted like nothing and relief. The head of security checked a message and tapped a guard into motion with his eyes. Route test, he announced. Terrace path, light check. Bianca waved Isabella forward with 2 fingers. Blue dress after this, for now we test the face the sun prefers. The terrace had been staged into an idea of celebration. Cloth-draped tables. Candles arranged themselves like well-behaved soldiers. Empty champagne flutes waited with their mouths open. Beyond the wall, the sea remained a rumor the breeze remembered to mention. The rental crew had left discreet marks in tape under the tablecloths. Someone would know where to put what, without having to ask the heir. Stand here, Bianca directed, leading Isabella to the edge where stone leaned over garden. Shoulders angled, hands gentle, chin a fraction lower. Smile as if tomorrow promised to behave. Isabella obeyed and let her gaze settle on a piece of sky nobody owned. Luca held the doorway. Attention split judiciously between glass and reflection. The head of security scanned hedges, columns, second-floor balconies, a rectangle of sky that could hide a camera if the neighbor 3 houses down enjoyed hobbies. A footman brought lemon water and half-tripped on a wrinkle that refused to lie flat. Isabella steadied the tray with 2 fingers. He met her eyes for a pulse, gratitude flaring fast and vanishing faster. Again, Bianca said, and this time think of nothing. I am already thinking of nothing. Think less. They tested angles until light changed its mind. When Bianca let her go, it sounded almost like mercy. 15 minutes, then the blue. They re-entered along the southern hall. Damp tracks from a cart had already faded. A door near the study sat a shade shy of shut. Voices slipped through. Paperwork in 2 days, a man said, one of Vittorio's. He wants signatures before the dinner. He will have a dinner when I choose, Vittorio replied. The kind of softness men use when they are sure of being obeyed. But papers can be ready. The announcement cannot slip, Bianca added. If journalists smell hesitation, they invent it. We feed them certainty. Double coverage on her floor. The head of security's voice said from inside. No one in or out without my eyes. The gray-eyed one stays. He notices. I want noticing until I don't. You remove him when the papers are done, Bianca said. Not before. When the papers are done, Vittorio agreed, not a day earlier. Silence that counted money and time at once. 2 days for signatures, Bianca concluded. 4 for the dinner. After that, the theater writes itself. Short play, the man said. Short and profitable. Isabella didn't realize her feet had stopped until Luca's presence touched her like a hand at the center of her back. She moved again with careful calm, and the door eased closer to shut, turning voices to weather. Keep walking, he murmured. I am. You don't want to be a framed picture in that doorway. 2 days. Signatures, he confirmed. Then the dinner, then the rest. How many days for the rest? Not many. The corridor opened into the long gallery. Guards resumed being decorative. A florist nudged a cart of extra vases along the wall, practicing invisibility. A maid buffed a console until it consented to reflect. Bianca appeared from the far end, timing on her side like a second heartbeat. "Blue," she said. "Now, the ring stays on. Learn the weight." In the dressing room behind the screen, Mariella worked fast, the way a person works when a clock owns the room. The blue made Isabella taller and older, the neckline severe enough to tell stories without words. Mariella adjusted a seam and a hem, then steadied Isabella's wrist for a fraction, warming the skin so the ring wouldn't bite. "It is heavy," Isabella said. "Gravity teaches posture." "Does it teach breathing?" "Not that kind." Bianca looked once and converted approval into a single nod. "Terrace, golden light if we're lucky, if not, we pretend." They returned to the edge of stone. The sky softened. The air had that late look that flatters everything. Staff retreated to correct distance. The head of security held 2 points in his gaze. Luca took the door and the glass together. Attention tightened into calm. "Hands on the rail," Bianca said. "Look east, give the hour your best lie." Isabella set her palms down. The ring pressed against the tender part where her pulse lived, as if signing from the inside. She let the light paint her face and practiced being a surface. A moment breathed and settled. Enough, Bianca decided. Inside. They crossed back through the doors. Lemon and polish reclaimed the air. Voices returned to the approved volume. The terrace closed behind them like a book at the end of a long paragraph. Luca paced at Isabella's shoulder for exactly the length protocol allowed, then peeled away like a shadow remembering itself. At the foot of the stairs, a cluster of staff waited for directions about more light. The head of security distributed lamps with the calm of a man who can move a battle by moving a table. Vittorio's voice traveled from the study, even and certain as if the day had behaved and been properly thanked. Isabella climbed to the landing with the nailed window and paused. A narrow slice of sky lay flat in the glass. She pressed her palm there anyway. The ring clicked against the pane with a tiny sound that made her pull her hand back. She tucked the weight into her palm and held it until her pulse found it, and learned for a moment to beat around it. Below, without looking up, Luca paused at the bottom step. 2 days, she whispered to the glass. 2 days, he answered, voice so low the wood swallowed it. They climbed and stood in appropriate doorways and played their parts until Bianca's lists ran out of afternoon. When Isabella returned to the corridor of her room, 2 guards had already taken positions at opposite ends, like patient clocks. One inclined his head the smallest degree. The head of security met her halfway, a file under his arm, the unhurried confidence of a man who believed in fences. Door after 9, he said. No visitors, staff rotation tightened. Your schedule posted. No improvisation. Understood. He waited a beat, not for an answer, for any flinch that might be interesting, found none, and moved on. The hallway breathed. A maid adjusted a lamp that did not need adjusting. Downstairs, someone laughed and apologized to no one. The house resumed the work of pretending that everything had been planned before anyone was born into it. In the short service corridor that paralleled the main hall, Isabella and Luca had 4 strides without witnesses. She used them. 2 days for papers, not... Yes. Then the dinner. Yes. What do we have? Time that belongs to no one else. It feels like the seams are being sewn shut in front of me. They are, fabric still breathes. You talk like a man patching leaks in a boat that is already underwater. Air rises if you make space. She almost smiled. The corridor ended. Public eyes returned. They walked as if nothing in the world had changed while everything did. Bianca called from the far end like a command disguised as a question. Ready for the last run? Isabella turned. The blue caught light and reflected nothing she didn't allow. She crossed the carpet one more time and stood where she was told, hands steady on the rail, chin quiet, eyes polite. Somewhere in the reflection of a pane, Luca watched the door and the window at once and saw in both a seam. Night folded over the east wing until the corridor outside her room looked like a tunnel the house had forgotten to light. Isabella closed the door carefully and stood with her forehead against the wood. The ring pressed a small ache into her finger like a reminder. She crossed to the vanity, opened the drawer, and pulled out the sketchbook. Lines came without asking permission. A coastline again, a gate again. The motion of a latch written as an arrow that only knew one direction. Her hand shook, and the graphite dragged through a tear that had slipped free, leaving a darker streak across the page. She put the pencil down and pressed her palms to her eyes. The room kept its careful quiet. Pipes ticked inside the walls like patient knuckles. Far below, a cart turned and hushed itself. If she held her breath, she could almost hear the conservatory breathing inside its glass ribs. The knock, soft and precise. 2 beats, a pause, 1. It found the new bone under her ribs and steadied there. She moved to the peephole. A shoulder, a clean jawline, the runner swallowing light. Who? North Watch. I'm not fit for visitors. I brought a message. What message? No, eat and breathe. She lifted the chain and opened the door just enough. Luca stood in the thin wedge of hallway, keeping to the darker edge of the light, giving the camera above the jamb nothing but the line of his back. He did not look past her into the room. He did not ask. You are allowed to look like you feel in here. In here does not stay in here. 5 minutes, he murmured. Then the house can have you back. He stepped inside and let the door close. She backed to the end of the bed and sat before her knees, decided to. He stayed by the wardrobe where the lamplight thinned to shadow, close enough to be real, far enough to be denied if anyone asked what stood in her room. You heard them near the study, she whispered. I did. 2 days. Papers. Then the dinner. Then the scene we use. I cannot see it. You do not need to see it yet. You need to be ready to move when it opens. How? You breathe. You sleep. You put your shoes where your hands will find them without thinking. My hands remember fear better than laces. They can learn more than one thing. Her laugh broke and reformed as a breath. He crossed half the room and stopped where the shadow met the light on the carpet. Look at me. She did. He lifted his hand carefully, letting the air decide if it objected. It didn't. His thumb touched the salt at the corner of her eye and caught a tear before it fell. The pressure was steady, not delicate, as if he believed skin could be a place to make a promise. I do not know how to do this without breaking. You already are doing it. It feels like drowning. Drowning people breathe until the last second. You are not at the last second. Teach me to count again. In through your nose for 4, hold 2, out 6. She followed the numbers. The first cycle snagged on the corset. The second opened a notch in her chest. The third made air heavy enough to matter. He waited, shoulders easing when her breath settled into rhythm as if her lungs had given his permission to relax. What happens after papers? They show you to rooms, they tighten escort, they depend on routine because routine is faithful. And you. I am kept until I am not. I am where you need me until I cannot be. We use both truths. You sound like a plan. I sound like a promise I intend to keep. Her fingers rose and found the hem of his jacket. She didn't tug. She touched like gravity needed confirmation. Do you ever want something more than you want to be safe? Yes. Now? Yes. The word warmed the space between them. He stepped the half distance that exists between rules and desire. She leaned that same measure. Breath mingled. Their mouths were close enough to feel the next move. Pressure rose like a tide. Footsteps stopped outside the door. The handle tested the latch. A brisk knock, not the pattern that meant mercy. Open. Bianca's voice cut the wood clean. Luca moved like a ripple of dark. The room offered almost no cover. The architect had designed it to be honest. The only pocket deep enough was the strip of shadow between the long curtains and the wall. He slipped into it and erased himself in a breath. Isabella tightened the robe, scrubbed her face dry with her sleeve, and opened the door. Bianca entered like a certainty. 2 guards took up their posts on either side of the doorway where the hall could see them. The ring caught the lamplight and threw a small circle of cold across the rug. You should be asleep. I was trying. Trying is for people whose lives are private. Bianca crossed to the vanity and righted a lipstick, a hairpin, a brush, bestowing order as if order were affection. Tomorrow you will answer questions you do not want in a voice that makes the questioner feel intelligent. Your face will wear gratitude. Your spine will translate it into poise. I am practicing. Less vanity, more posture. Bianca's eyes skimmed the room, a magnet searching for nails. The air chose to be innocent. The curtains remembered how to be still. The chain on the door dangled, and she hooked it up with a neat motion that said she owned the idea of precaution. No more sketching. I draw to think. You will not need to think. A smile that was not kind and not cruel, just certain. She stepped closer and studied Isabella's face for cracks a camera could exploit. You are pale without looking weak. Keep that. It is fashionable obedience. I will try. Do. Bianca looked at the shoes lined beside the bed, the shawl folded patiently, the ring where it should be, the unrumpled sheets. She took 2 steps toward the door, then paused to check the echo of her own power. Your door will be guarded after 9. No visitors. Staff rotations tightened. You will greet the morning like a person who understands gratitude. You will decide nothing. Understood. Understanding is irrelevant. Execution is polite. She left. The guards clicked back into place. The hallway exhaled. Isabella closed the door and stood with her forehead against it until the wood gave her cool back to her skin. The room released a silence shaped like a human. Luca eased out of the curtain shadow and looked like a man again. The lamplight caught a thread on his cuff and did not bother him with it. Your stepmother smells disobedience. She walked past it because it would slow her list. She believes schedules more than she believes people. I could not answer when she told me not to think. You answered correctly. What would you have said? That thinking is already a kind of escape. She would call that dangerous. She would be right. They didn't touch. The space between them pressed like a hand at her lower back. He lifted his hand and let the backs of his fingers trace the line of her jaw, a path a whisper might prefer. She leaned the smallest degree toward it and stopped there. The restraint made the touch feel like a vow. Tell me something that makes staying bearable for 10 more minutes. A storm is moving in from the west. Weather makes schedules honest. Rain will not stop this house. It will blur edges. Blurred edges are seams. What else? The head of security eats on the hour. His patience shortens 5 minutes before and 5 after. How is that useful? Knowing a man is hungry is timing. What else? The new North Arch camera reflects in the second window only at dusk. In day, the angle reads clean. Windows lie. Reflections tell the truth. The words rewired the way her spine held the room. If they remove you after papers, do I wait? You stay ordinary as long as ordinary keeps you safe. You breathe. You walk the map on the schedule they believe in. You keep the shoes by the bed. When the seam opens, you step through. You do not look back at doors that have already decided to close. You sound like weather. I sound like the way out. Another set of steps slowed in the corridor. A guard murmured into a radio and moved on. The house cleared its throat in 2 rooms at once, reminding them it could be every witness. Luca drew a breath like a curtain being let down. Time. I hate that word. It will be ours soon. She caught his hand and pressed it against her sternum, over the place the ring had not been allowed to change. He did not pull away. The warmth of his palm steadied her in a way the lists never could. Do you want to kiss me? Yes. Then why are we not? Because this room keeps a ledger. I am tired of owing. Then we pay later somewhere that does not remember what it is owed. The thought lit a dangerous bright line under her skin. She took her hand away first, because someone had to. He stepped back in fractions until the space between them reset to ordinary. I will be here until I am not, he said quietly. If I cannot be, you will already know where to put your feet. What if I freeze? You move anyway. What if I fall? I will catch you. The certainty was built like a shelf. It made belief feel like balance instead of risk. He turned to the door and waited. She followed because her feet had learned his rhythm. One more thing, she whispered, and anything. If they make me choose a smile tomorrow, will you recognize the truth under it? Always. He opened the door the width of his body and slipped into the corridor. The chain lifted and settled without a sound. She stood and listened to the small exchange of the watch in the hall. All quiet. Quiet as pay. She closed the door and turned the lock. The room resumed being itself. She moved the shoes a thumb's width closer to where waking hands would find them. Sleep came in squares, stitched with breath counts and the memory of a thumb catching a tear before it fell. In one square, she stood on the terrace and the first drops found her scalp like a warning. In another, the conservatory latch gave because she remembered how to ask it. In another, a gate swung because she had not looked back. Wind shouldered the window once. Voices rose and settled in the courtyard. Radios clicked like insects and went still. She drifted, deeper, to the place where choices can be rehearsed without punishment. Dawn bled into the curtains while her eyes were open. She had not noticed the hour crossing. The ring lay on the nightstand because she had taken it off instead of sleeping with its weight. She lifted it and curled it into her palm until the metal warmed. Breath in 4. Hold 2. Out 6. The storm tapped the glass lightly like a reminder. A knock right on time, a maid with a tray and eyes trained to be brief. Tea. Thank you. The girl almost added something and swallowed it whole. The cup went down where it would not leave a ring. The door closed with care. Isabella let the heat travel through her hands and up her wrists. Somewhere, a guard traded posts. Somewhere, the head of security checked a list and felt content with fences. Somewhere down the hall, a man adjusted a camera by a degree that made no difference to anyone but him. She dressed for rehearsal with the economy of someone packing for flight. Mariella's hands fastened hooks and smoothed seams without fuss. Blue again later, Mariella murmured, it makes the air listen. I will wear it. Stand by the window for a minute before you leave. Light forgives blue. Mariella stepped back and let her look at herself. The mirror considered arguing, and did not. Isabella slid the ring on and watched it settle. Warmth changed the metal's mind about who owned it. At the door, she paused and counted breath one more time. She opened it before anyone could knock. 2 guards looked up and performed boredom. Down the corridor, a shadow lifted its head and became a man pretending to be furniture. He did not smile, neither did she. The look between them was brief and complete, a wire strung tight between 2 buildings that had learned to survive wind. Ready? She offered to the air. Ready. The day answered in the weight of his step behind her. She walked. The house arranged itself, sure it knew how the morning would go. It had not accounted for the way a seam widens when 2 people decide not to let it close. The storm broke with a low growl that made the windows answer. Rain worked the gutters like fingers testing a lock. Isabella woke without knowing if she had slept at all, her body already braced for the house to claim her again. The vanity clock held its face like a secret. She lay still and listened to the estate measure the hour. A cart whispered 2 floors down, a hinge settled, a guard's radio hissed and went quiet. Lightning pressed white against the curtains, and the room flashed like a photograph she had not agreed to. A knock touched the door in the pattern her bones had learned. 2 beats, a pause, 1. She crossed the rug and put her eye to the peephole. A shoulder, the edge of a jaw, rain shining on black wool. Who? North Watch. I'm awake. Good. The seam opened. She lifted the chain and let the door move an inch. Luca stood in the dark slice of corridor, water running from his collar, hair damp against his temple. Thunder framed him. He kept to the wedge where the camera above the jamb could not make a useful shape of him. How long? 11 minutes until rotation. 4 of blind when the next gust hits the north arch feed. We use the halls that breathe. Avoid the ones with marble. What about the head of security? He is on the west balcony inventing a flood. He will solve it loudly for 5 minutes and quietly for none. We move now. She slid her feet into the shoes she had put where panic would find them without light. The ring lay on the nightstand. She curled it into her palm until the metal warmed and slipped it on. The weight felt different when it belonged to her decision and not the room. Breathe. In for 4. Hold 2. Out 6. Good. She wrapped a dark shawl over the sleep dress Mariella had left for comfort, a soft thing that would not slow her arms. Luca checked the corridor with a glance that carried more than a map. He offered the space with a tilt of his body. Left, service stair, not the long gallery. Too much glass, too much echo. She eased the door until the latch kissed the strike and let it rest there, not closed, not open. They moved without touching. The house had a way of hearing skin. The corridor was a tunnel with the dimmers turned down. Rain hammered the roof. 2 guards at the far crossway practiced boredom. Lightning washed their faces into masks for a blink. Luca kept Isabella on the shadow side of the runner, carpet swallowing their steps. At the first turn, he paused to let a maid pass with a bundle of towels pressed to her chest. The girl kept her head down, eyes moving fast, lips a thin line of concentration. Isabella lowered her chin and made herself part of the dark. The girl flowed by with the speed of a person who knows safety is measured in minutes. Their shoulders almost brushed, a human nearness that did not register as a mistake. Now, they slipped into the service stair where stone drank the sound of their souls. The air tasted like metal and soap. The storm leaned on the outer wall, and the stairwell answered with a low groan. A single bulb buzzed like an insect above the landing. Luca held 2 fingers at his thigh, a metronome of timing. Down 1 laundry corridor. Wait for the gust before the next turn. They landed among baskets and the clean smell of steam. The laundry belonged to night labor, machines asleep, a button chiming in a metal pan, irons with their mouths closed. Isabella's shoulder brushed a rack of damp linen and came away wet. A door at the far end stood a finger's width open, letting in a pale wedge from the main hall. Beyond it, footsteps, slow and measured. Hold. Her breath tried to hurry. She counted it down. In 4. Hold 2. Out 6. The steps passed. The door saw nothing because some doors only tell stories when paid. Lightning cracked. The light stuttered, then steadied. Luca moved. They took the side passage that ran behind the kitchen. Voices pulsed through swing doors in bursts, a language of heat and hands. Pots bumped. Someone laughed and muted it with a towel. A junior guard asked if the storm would ruin the ice carvings, as if ice and weather were the estate's only problems. Luca tilted his head a degree, collecting useful irrelevancies. 2 at the back entrance, west balcony still drowning. Bianca isn't on this floor. Where? Music room 10 minutes ago, correcting a flower that did not know its place. She does not sleep when storms argue. The passage narrowed and turned. A thin brass gate blocked the way, an afterthought meant to remind staff of their boundaries. The latch sat high, a petty difficulty calculated to humiliate. Luca slid a loop of wire from his pocket, shaped a curve, and lifted. The latch relaxed with a tiny surrender. Quiet hinges. Someone cared once. They entered the lower east hall where old portraits shared wall space with new cameras. The storm smeared pale light across the floor. Red eyes blinked steady. Another growl rolled overhead, and the power dipped. Enough to make lenses hesitate. The red went dark, and woke again. Luca counted without numbers. She felt the measure of it in the pause between muscle and motion. Here. He let his fingers brush her sleeve, not a grip, more like an arrow. They stepped into an alcove between cabinets. A guard turned the far corner, face lit by his radio screen. He spoke to someone who answered him with static cheerfulness, the way men do when weather can be blamed. He passed within 20 feet and never lifted his head. The storm obliged with a gust that made the windows shiver. The camera above the alcove blinked and steadied. Go. They reached the corridor to the conservatory. The air changed temperature there, as if a different weather ruled that small kingdom. It carried green and damp earth. The plant lamps had been turned off to appease the storm. The glass roof rattled, rain arguing with anything transparent. 2 strides from the doors, perfume cut the dark. A streak that meant power had pivoted and chosen a new path. Bianca came around the corner from the music room, a dark line against the less dark. Her silhouette carried its own arrogance. She stopped with the precise attention of someone who expects silence to report. Who is there? Luca moved before the question finished. He folded Isabella into the pocket where the corridor's angle made a narrow shadow. A heavy velvet curtain hung over a storage niche, old celebration cannibalized for utility. He drew it forward a fraction. The cloth smelled faintly of dust and roses. His chest pressed against her back with the control of a man who can be a wall without trapping. His breath warmed the place below her ear. The storm helped. Thunder stepped down the roof. The corridor chose the sound. Bianca stood still, listening with the cruelty of a person who expects obedience even from air. Her heels made no sound, and thus sounded like authority. Show yourself. A radio crackled behind her. Madame, west balcony. Water is pooling. Deal with it. Head of security says the drain is blocked. Then unblock it. She lingered a second longer, feeding on her own patience. Isabella kept her face turned to the curtain and saw, in its weave, a memory of party nights when people believed love could be made to perform. Luca's hand rested near her hip, not claiming, simply locating. She counted her breath. 4, 2, 6. Numbers gave her a small order the house did not own. Bianca moved on, her scent trailing strictness. Luca let the curtain fall only when the echo of her steps died. The velvet settled like relief. He eased Isabella forward, the space widening enough for air to return to normal size. She will double back in 2 minutes. How do you know? She likes evidence to agree. They covered the last steps to the conservatory doors. Brass handles were cool, slick with the fine mist the storm had pushed through the sill. The latch had always pretended to require struggle. Isabella set her fingers on it and remembered the rule her sketches had been teaching her hands in secret. Left, then up. The latch obeyed like a pleased servant. It released with a mild groan, and the door eased. A stripe of colder air found their faces. Earth rose to meet it, loam and leaf, and the metal breath of rain. Inside the conservatory held the storm like a drum. Leaves shivered. Droplets pinged from glass ribs onto tile. The fig tree in the corner made its own weather. Isabella stepped under it and laid a palm on the bark, where she had learned to breathe without attracting punishment. The tree felt warmer than the air. For a beat she believed it knew her name. Isabella. I'm here. 6 minutes to the arch blind. 3 to the next guard turn. We must vanish before the house realizes it misplaced you. She crossed to the garden door. On most nights it existed to deliver guests to photographs of themselves. Tonight the storm had put ceremony on hold. Wind pressed hard from the other side. She wrapped her fingers around the handle and felt the push like a living thing. Together. They leaned, and the door gave. Rain hit them like 1,000 small decisions. The garden was a darker dark, hedges losing their perfect edges, gravel paths shining like slick rivers. The first step into it felt like a line crossed that no list could erase. Cold soaked the shawl in one breath. Hair stuck to her forehead. The dress dragged at her knees, heavy with water. Luca moved to her left, 1 pace away, allowing the space that kept them unremarkable and ready to refuse it if she needed more. The storm owned the night and they borrowed its manners. Lower. Keep to the hedge line, do not silhouette against the glass. Lightning flared and the long windows of the house flashed her back to her, a dark figure with another anchor beside it. The image died. She became only weight and intent again. Where? North wall. Service gate by the rosemary. The cameras hesitate when the wind moves the branches. We pass during the stutter. The gravel tried their footing. The storm shoved and tugged like a crowd. Behind them, the conservatory lights blinked as the generator tested faith. Isabella kept a hand at the hedge top, leaves pricking her skin with small insistences. A guard's flashlight swept the far terrace in a slow, official arc, then moved on, satisfied by its own ceremony. They reached the lower walk where formal beds gave way to the orchard that pretended wildness. The rosemary leaned and shook, releasing a scent that tried to be food and memory at once. A low gate sat in the hedge, a utility exit used by gardeners who knew more about living than men with radios. Wait for the gust. Luca watched the red dot on the camera mount above the trellis. Now. They ducked under the rosemary. The scent rose and wrapped them. Luca lifted the small bolt. The gate protested in a thin sound, then surrendered when he leaned his shoulder into it. They slid into the narrow lane outside the garden wall. Rain ran there like a river still choosing its name. It hurried toward the back road, a used path for trucks that arrived before dawn. The house hummed behind them, electrical and old. Isabella looked back once and saw in the conservatory glass the faint impression of two figures moving through weather. She had the wild thought that leaves pressed their faces to the panes to watch. Do not look back. I won't. They moved along the lane, heads low, bodies taking up as little space as people can take up when they have decided not to be furniture. A fox streaked across the end of the lane and vanished into a hedge, a flash of certainty that made her chest ache with envy and joy. Mud grabbed at her shoes and failed. The wind tore the last dry from their clothes and flung it into the orchard. At the corner where the lane met the outer wall, a small door waited with rust smudged at its handle. The padlock hung from a loop with its mouth open. It had been engaged earlier and given up for the storm. Luca checked the hinge with 2 fingers and nodded. 3 steps to the service road. A dip in the shoulder hides us from the south camera. The north camera sleeps for the next 30 seconds. Do you trust it? I trust weather and the fact that men keep habits even when it rains. They slipped through to the road, a strip of black glass under the lamps. Trees on the far side thrashed and confessed their branches. Wind shoved shoulders, apologized, and shoved again. Somewhere, a generator argued with itself and lost. Down. He pointed to the drainage break where grass overgrew a shallow ditch. They crouched there, backs to wet earth, the wall a dark cliff behind them. The storm did the work of cover. Water ran down Isabella's spine and pooled at her waistband. It felt like an old indignity rewritten into proof. Cars. None close. The patrol will circle Eastgate first. They believe the obvious. What if the head of security solves his flood? He will scold a radio he thinks is the sky, then count the men he did not trust. Counting takes time. The north camera winked and went dark as wind punched the cedar that sheltered it. Luca touched her sleeve with 1 finger. Across. Stay with the trees. The car is down the slope behind the pines. 2 minutes of open ground. Not yet. Now. They rose and crossed, bodies angled to make the least argument with the wind. Rain stung their faces. The ditch on the far side accepted them like a brief friend. They slid along it to the pines. Cover was incomplete and generous. Luca lifted his chin toward a patch of deeper black where shape argued with shape. Here. A car crouched behind the trunks, paint dull, plates borrowed from a story no one would read. Water gathered in the trunk seam and spilled. Luca opened the passenger door with a click only the storm heard. In. We leave on the next thunder, tires need noise. Isabella slid in. Wet fabric went cold, then began to give way to the cabin's stubborn warmth. The dashboard glowed with 2 needles and a minor ambition. Luca rounded the hood, dropped into the driver's seat and pulled the door with the care of returning a book to a loud library. Breathe. I am. He turned the key. The engine woke like an animal that knew better than to bark. Thunder hit heavy and late. He let the car ease down the slope to the hidden mouth of the service road. From the lane behind, the house threw a handful of light into the rain. A radio crackled with urgency that might become anger. The cedars bowed and straightened. The north camera blinked back to life and found nothing it could turn into a report. Tell me when you want me to look back. When you are ready to see how small it is. I will be ready soon. Good. The trees closed around them, water shattering in the headlight beams, road lines slipping past like shed skin. She kept her palm on the ring, feeling it warm under her skin. The estate receded behind the curtain of weather. The storm owned them and did not ask for payment. Do not leave me. I won't. They took the first turn that led away from any version of mourning the house had planned. Somewhere inside those walls, doors would be counted and found wrong. A study light would snap on. A voice would try to rearrange weather. In the narrow road and the louder dark, two people moved because they had chosen to. Rain stitched the road into crooked silver and tore it up again. The wipers fought and lost, then fought anyway. Luca kept the car in the thin seam between ditch and trees while the wind tugged at the world like a stubborn child. Left at the fork, 2 kilometers of bad pavement, brace the dash if you need to. Isabella already had the ring warm in her palm. She let go long enough to set her hand against the dashboard. The car hit a ridge, climbed out of it with a grunt, and through water that vanished behind them. How long until they notice? They've noticed. Luca kept his eyes on the wet gray ahead. Now they argue about how to sound like they noticed. She could almost see the room, a study lamp waking. A radio lifted like a threat disguised as a tool, a mouth picking words that would punish without admitting fear. Breathe. In for 4. Hold 2. Out 6. Good. The lane tipped toward a narrow bridge over a ditch swollen into a fast brown muscle. He eased the speed, felt the line, let the tires hum across the planks. The far bank grabbed them hard and steady. Static coughed from the scanner wedged into the console pocket. Not their unit, just hungry enough to catch anything loud and close. East gate clear. West balcony flood resolved. North arch feedback online. Count heads. A lower voice slid in without trying. Count is off. Vittorio never needed volume. Silence brought him a chair. Isabella pressed the ring harder into her palm and watched rain fail to explain itself on the glass. Which head? Another voice tried for calm. Too short. A third answered. Guard rotation down 1. Staff correct. Floor 2 quiet. The girl? Vittorio said, and the wind seemed to lean closer. Find her. The channel blurred into weather. Luca downshifted to feel the tires talk and then let them go again. They'll flood the roads around the house first, he said, catching the tight set of her mouth. They'll believe the obvious. We're not there. What about town? They'll stall each other in the mayor's office until the storm finishes laughing. We cut behind. Lightning laid a white bar across the sky, and for a breath she saw roofs, far off to the right, and the slick trace of a river beyond. Thunder rolled up late and heavy. The air smelled like pennies and stone. Do you have a plan if the road disappears? I have 3. Any of them surrender? No. The scanner woke again. The head of security sounded like a man asking maps to love him. Confirm vehicles. 2 to the east road. Block the southern farm track. I want eyes on the coastal turn. Send 3, Vittorio said, almost gentle. 3, the man repeated. And you, Vittorio added, closer to the microphone now, as if leaning over it, as if speaking to a boy. Stop narrating. Bring me names of men who are not where they are paid to be. The line clicked dead. Rain reclaimed the cabin. Luca dimmed the headlights to the soft edge of legal and slid the car to the right quarter of the lane. The road narrowed, oily and nervous. Left, he said. The old orchard route. It runs behind the town like a secret people forgot to share. He turned onto a track that had not been improved since someone last quarreled over sugar. Mud rose and fell under the tires. Branches slapped the windshield and sprang back. The wipers found their own rhythm and lost it and found it again. "Tell me if you need me to be brave," Isabella said, voice steadying against the motion. "You already are. Tell me anyway." "I need your eyes on the right shoulder. Call holes." "Deep one in 20 meters, right side." He saw it with her, a black mouth where the shoulder had been eaten into a thought. He hugged left, let the right tire skim, felt the chassis object, and then accept. Water rushed into the gap behind them, and pretended it had always been there. "When does this end?" "When we stop living on his map." "How?" "We draw yours." "Draw with what?" "Breath, timing, names that are owed to you." The scanner hissed again, voices now muffled like men behind a closed door. "South farm track blocked. Nothing moving. East road wet. No signs. Coastal turn. Vehicle passed 20 minutes ago. City plate." "Useless," someone sighed. Bianca's voice cut in, dry and intact in the rain. "Stop barking at the wrong trees. The girl is not a plate. She is a habit. Find the places where she breathes." A pause that felt like men staring at the floor. "What places?" "The Conservatory, North Garden service lane. I can smell rosemary from here. Check the gate." "Gate is wet," a guard offered, proud of a fact. "Everything is wet," Bianca answered. "Look for what is dry in a storm." The line went quiet like a room embarrassed by itself. "You have done this before," Isabella said. "I have left rooms that thought they owned me. Not like this." "How is this different?" "This time I leave with what the room wanted most." Heat moved under her skin, clean and welcome despite the cold. She touched his forearm for one beat and returned her hand to the dash because the track preferred physics to poetry. Light lifted behind them, not lightning. Headlights steady, turning with intent. The distance closed by a thumb's width. "They are behind us." "Yes." "Do they know it is us?" "They know something ahead, forgot to say please." "What do we do?" "Decide how much noise we are." He fed the car a little more road, enough to feel fast without bragging. The track fought and lost. The lights behind swelled and steadied, a hunter rehearsing patience. Branches reached for them and failed to keep them. A fence flashed and retired. Rain thickened into a veil and then tore. "Next fork," Luca said. "The right looks safe, that is why it is wrong. We take the left." "How do you know?" "Wrong roads do not advertise." The fork offered a gravel right with the promise of a sign and a thinner left that hugged an old stone line like a secret. He took the left. The car grated and kept going. The lights behind chose applause and swung into the gravel in a shallow flood in a field. The beams slowed, changed their minds without dignity, and vanished in the storm for a minute that belonged to someone else. They picked the crowd. We picked the seam. The lane squeezed into a tunnel of branches. Low walls remembered borders no one else did. A dark maw opened ahead. "Slow," Isabella said. "Large hole, left." He straddled it, coaxed, and rolled out onto pocked pavement. The tires caught and sighed. The road dropped through a fold of land, past a henhouse and a long dark barn. A single window in a farmhouse held a square of gold, like an argument with the night. A dog barked once and thought better of it. The spur joined a better road that ran parallel to the coast behind windbreaks. He eased to a speed that sounded like a person going somewhere aloud. Rain slackened to a steady hiss. The car breathed warmer. A wash of white sat ahead under a plane tree. Not lightning. A sedan angled crosswise, trying to be a wall. One guard leaned on the hood, shoulders rounded against the storm, cigarette hissing each time a drop touched it. Another stood in the lane with a flashlight, lazy circles asking to be respected. "Roadblock. It is a suggestion. Look at the right shoulder, dead grass before the fence." "I see it." "Shallow ditch there. Farm drains. What if we get stuck? Then I get us unstuck." The flashlight lifted like a priest blessing strangers. Luca dipped the beam, made a small, respectful nod that belonged to early mornings, and slid toward the shoulder with the patience of water. The tires stepped off tarmac, rode the pressed earth where deliveries had taught the edge to behave, and threaded between trunk and post like a cat that refuses to learn the word furniture. The guard shouted a word that did not believe itself. The smoker straightened like a scene change. Something tapped the trunk, a fist, a boot, maybe just attention. The car eased back into the lane and kept its story. They will report that. They will report it carefully. Hallways are not kind to men who narrate poorly. The scanner agreed with a burst of nervous noise. Possible contact on Farm Road. Details, Vittorio asked, almost kind. Black sedan, no plate we could read, 2 inside. Turn it into a fact, he said, or turn in your keys. The line died like a door closing on a lesson. Rain ticked. Wind widened. The sea announced itself by how air tasted like salt in distance. Tell me something true, Isabella said. You are safe with me. Tell me something else. We are not done being hunted. Then find a place where hunting becomes a bad idea. My mother's family. Yes. You hoped I would pick that. I did. Will you take me to their gate? I will stand there until blood remembers itself. What if they turn us away? Then they are counterfeit and we keep going. She covered his hand on the wheel for a second. Tendons moved under her fingers as he walked the car through a gust. A town sign flashed and vanished. Another narrow lane joined, then gave up. The horizon rose and fell like a throat swallowing. Headlights returned behind, farther back, more disciplined. Not a stumble this time. A car held the line and began to close, careful and patient. Luca did not change speed. He softened their lane position and let the wind do work. They are learning. They are using a different kind of man. What do we do? Decide to be a coincidence. How do you fake that? With boredom. He touched the hazards for 2 patient blinks as if acknowledging pooled water. He eased for a puddle that did not need easing. The car behind dipped its lights politely, then hesitated, then fell back 2 lengths, uncertain about the script. Doubt buys time. But not forever. Nothing does. The road curved around a terraced hill. Vines slept under water, rose marching into fog. A gravel track threw itself off left, bad and tempting. That one. Cooper's Grove, Luca said. Light car can make it tonight. Heavy car will learn humility. Do we take it? We do, and we listen to expensive shocks discover mud. He braked gently, signaled like a neighbor, and turned onto the gravel. Tires skated and then bit. The engine strained and held. Gravel rattled under their feet like hail. Pines crowded and then relented. Behind them, the deeper engine committed to the climb with bad manners. The sound swelled, heavy with endurance. It found a gouge, tried to be important, and shouted in wet metal. Headlights bobbed and tilted, the smell of hot rubber pushed forward on the wind. They are stuck. They are learning the difference between a line on paper and a hill in rain. They crested and let the car smooth along the top, where old oaks caught the wind, and the ground had been tamped by decades of honest work. The track curved and dropped toward barns that had forgotten their last owners. Beyond, a larger road ran toward the hills where her mother's family kept stone and stubborn pride. Stop 1 minute. He slid the car under the lee of a long, low shed, cut the engine, and let the storm take its own breath. Rain poured in silver ropes off the roof edge. Wind tested screws and found them loyal. The night kept its animals quiet. What do you need? To decide loud in a quiet place. She turned. Water had flattened his hair, darkened his lashes, made him look younger and more dangerous at once. If they catch us, I will never live in that house again. They will not catch us, and if they do, I will not walk back through that door. Understood. I am telling a person who will not forgive me if I break it. I am that person. He took her hand. Warmth lived in his palm despite the cold. His thumb traced the narrow bones on the back of her hand as if learning them for memory rather than proof. She leaned toward him, and their foreheads met first. The simple contact, where air becomes shared. Do not give yourself up for me. I considered it. Do not. I will not. Promise. I promise. Her breath stuttered and steadied. The storm stepped back a pace. She lifted her mouth and touched his, a test to see if reality held. It did. The second kiss found shape. The third found heat. He waited long enough for her to choose, then answered with the restraint of a man who has decided never to take what was not offered. The car smelled of rain and wool, and a memory of basil from a kinder day. Her heart learned the rhythm of his, and kept it. Again. He did. The roof rattled. The world continued as if it had been expecting them. When they parted, the air tasted cleaner. She stayed close, forehead against his, eyes closed. Now I can keep going. We keep going. They will not stop. No. Then we go to my mother's family. We stand at their gate and make the name mean something. Yes. You come to the door with me. I stand there until they decide correctly. And if Vittorio follows, then the decision becomes easier for them. A small laugh escaped her, bright and alive enough to surprise them both. He smiled and looked less like a weapon and more like a man relieved to be used for the right thing. We should move. We should. The engine returned without complaint. They rolled out from the shed, picked their way down past the barns, and let the track hand them to the main road. The grove folded behind like a page you do not dog-ear when you know you will not need to find it again. Traffic was thin and cautious. A truck passed with lights high and a driver folded into his thoughts. A small car followed for a minute and turned toward a cluster of houses where a dog barked in the language of boredom. Rain settled into patience. Will they try the highway? They will post men on every ramp and congratulate themselves. We will be past their best idea before they finish praising it. What if someone has a new idea? Then we admire it from a distance. The coastal sign appeared. Luca took the curve and let the car settle into a lane that felt earned. The sea, unseen, made itself known in the way the wind widened and carried salt. I remember this, Isabella said, and you have never been. My mother wrote it into me. They rose along a cliff that fell away into white sound. The guardrail kept its counsel. The tires wrote quiet arcs that looked like signatures. The scanner stirred once more, tired now. Nothing on ridge, farm track impassable, town quiet. Coastal turn. Negative. Bianca entered, voice still neat after a long night. She will be where her mother would have been. Where? The head of security asked, trying and failing to sound clever. Home? Luca switched the unit off and gave the silence its work back. Hills stacked themselves ahead in dark folds. The road laid itself out like a promise someone meant to keep. Tell me the rest. You step through their gate, Luca said. You say your mother's name and yours. You say what was done and what will not be done again. You stand straight and let them see you already saved yourself once. And you? I stand next to you in a way that says I am not your mouth and not your shield. If they test me, I am polite, while politeness is a useful metal. And after. After, the house learns it is yours. She drew a breath that hurt in a clean way and let it go. The names on the next signs softened into the ones from her mother's letters, words shaped by being said at tables where people did not whisper. Thank you. For what? For walking off a map that did not deserve you. I did not walk for the map. I know. They drove while night listened. Distance began to feel like safety instead of absence. Heat rose slow from the vents and warmed their shins. She slid her fingers into his again, not to borrow strength, but to show him hers was standing beside his. Tell me if you are tired. I am awake enough to finish this road. Then go on. He did. The lane bent inland toward the hills where the family she had been forbidden to meet kept stubborn light behind old stone. The storm drew its curtain behind them, as if to guard what had just begun. Ahead, the dark thinned by a tone she recognized from mornings in the conservatory when a leaf touched glass and called it a promise. She closed her eyes for 3 breaths and opened them on a world that stayed exactly where she needed it. The map she'd never been allowed to draw unrolled inside her chest, and for the first time, every turn led away from fear. The hills rose in slow breaths as the storm fell behind them. Wind softened to a steady hand. Stone walls and cypress lined the final stretch, the kind of trees that remember names longer than people do. A set of iron gates came out of the dark with 2 lanterns like patient eyes. The crest on the arch held a lion and a rose. Isabella knew it the way a child knows her name in a crowd. Luca eased the car to idle. 2 men stepped from the guardhouse with coats dark from rain, holsters visible, palms open. One lifted a hand for patience, the other checked the windshield. Lantern light found Isabella's face when she lowered the window an inch. Name: Isabella Valenti Romano. An older guard joined them, tall under a pulled coat, hair silver at the edges. His gaze found hers and stayed. Your mother. Alessandra Valenti. She married Vittorio Romano. He barred this gate. I am asking it to remember me. The man took a breath that sounded like a memory. You have her mouth. I have her courage now. His eyes moved to Luca and measured him without hostility. Your companion. Luca, last name. Not important tonight. The older guard pressed the intercom with a gentleness that belonged to family. Open for the Valenti girl. The gates moved with the sound of stone deciding to be kind. Gravel spoke under the tires. Hedges shook the last silver from their leaves. The villa revealed itself by degrees, long and low, windows warm, arches catching light like a rhythm. Isabella put her hand on Luca's arm for one brief second to keep from dissolving. Under the portico, he cut the engine. A woman stood in the doorway before the door could finish opening. Black dress for dignity, white hair like a crown, eyes bright with a life that had not learned to bow. 2 men flanked her like bookends. Staff hovered with the trained hush of people who move first and speak later. Isabella stepped from the car. The woman's face changed, fine lines turning into space for relief. Who stands at my door? Alessandra's daughter. The woman crossed the stone with the quick grace of someone who has practiced decisive kindness. She framed Isabella's face in both hands and studied her like love takes inventory. You are the same and not the same. I had to learn. You learned under wolves. One of the men touched the woman's elbow, not to guide, to steady the air. Zia Caterina, let her in. Caterina turned and drew them over the threshold. Towels found hands. A housekeeper pressed warm cups into the chill. Guards shifted positions by doors and windows with the ease of people who had chosen the right side of a story. Luca kept to the edge of the room and refused to be furniture. The younger man of the 2 watched him like a necessary test. You bring her in a storm. We did not choose the weather. Your intent? To stand with her, to keep her safe until she does not need me to. Caterina weighed him the way a matriarch weighs a blade and nodded once. We will have names in the morning. Tonight we have sanctuary. Bring them to the blue room. The blue room was high-ceilinged and warm, a fire burning because welcome should glow. A doctor waited with a case by his chair. He counted Isabella's pulse with calm fingers, looked at the small ring mark on her skin, and set his jaw with a private anger that did not need speech. I am well, Isabella murmured. You look like it, he answered and wrapped a soft wool blanket over her shoulders. But you are allowed to be tended. Caterina sat opposite. Her gaze was a shelter. Tell me. Isabella told it. Not every small cruelty, not every chime of the schedule. She told the plan shaped like marriage, the rehearsed gratitude, the ring, the rosemary and the gate, the lane and the storm, and how a man caught her when the carpet wanted to claim her. She spoke in a steady voice and the room kept a steady breath. When the story ended, the men behind Caterina had their palms open as if ready to lift something heavy. Katerina's posture adjusted by a degree that history understands. You will not go back. I will not go back. Then you will not go back. A guard entered, rein on his collar, respect in his timing. The phone. Whose? Vittorio Romano. Caterina did not blink. He may speak to the hall. He may not speak to my table. The guard nodded and vanished. Down the corridor, a voice that had made rooms rearrange themselves met stone that did not. Isabella looked at the ring on her finger. The weight no longer belonged to her father. She slid it off. The skin faintly indented, the way metal pretends to be fate. She placed it on the table and did not push it away. Keep it, she told the housekeeper, a woman named Pia, who moved like a prayer that had learned hands. As proof, if anyone forgets, do not let it touch me again. Pia lifted it with the cautious grip reserved for nettles and sealed it in a velvet pouch. Caterina's palm grazed Isabella's wrist, a silent blessing. Good. The younger man by the hearth studied Luca. Do you love her? Yes. The answer did not reach for poetry. It was a plank the room could step onto. The man's mouth softened. Caterina's eyes warmed. You will eat, she said, gentle now. Then you will rest. The world will pull at our door. It will find out what doors are for. Bowls of soup arrived, steam smelling of time and patience. Bread landed in torn halves that invited hands. Isabella ate and discovered hunger waiting under fear like a small animal that had outlived winter. Luca drank and watched the doorways and made it look like nothing. What happens when he tries to pull us back? Isabella asked. He threatens, Caterina answered. He flatters. He names the law as if it were his mirror. We answer with paper and men who owe us breath. With women who are tired of being counted as furniture. With rifles if reason fails. Bianca will dress his loss and call it strategy. The doctor cleared his throat softly. Sleep will argue less than talk. I need to see a room, Isabella said. The one with my mother's piano. Caterina rose. The blue chamber. She practiced until the night went soft. Pia guided Isabella down a corridor that smelled of beeswax and thyme. Portraits watched and did not judge. The blue chamber opened on a bed that had learned years and a balcony door traced with rain. Embers in the small fireplace braided their breath with the quiet. Pia lit 2 candles, set water on a table, and left with the dignity of a person who knows intimacy is not a spectacle. Isabella went to the balcony and put her palm to cold glass. The storm had dropped to a whisper. Beyond the olives, frogs tuned themselves to calm. She turned. Luca stood just inside, stillness shaped into a man. Close the door. He turned the handle slowly so the latch would not steal the moment. He waited. Waiting had been his language since the hedgerow. She crossed the rugs and stopped close enough to see rain dried in his lashes. Are you afraid? Of losing you? I am here. I know. Her fingers found his cheek the way a person checks sun-warmed stone. He did not lean and did not pull away. She closed the last inch and put her mouth to his. The answer that had been learning itself finally spoke. He returned it with care, as if lifting something priceless and newly alive. Is this what you want? Yes. Are you sure? Yes. He kissed her as if the word made him taller. His hands found her shoulders, then her waist, and did not hurry. She held his face with hands that had been taught to shake, and were now learning not to. She stepped back, because the body likes to watch its freedom arrive. He followed without taking. She guided without fear. The room accepted them without a witness. When fabric loosened, it was because she asked it to. When she lay down, the bed answered first with trust. Do you want light? A little. He left the candles as they were. He sat at the mattress edge so their faces stayed readable. She placed his hand over her heart, not for proof, for belonging. Breath went shallow, then deep. The first pain was a small bright thing that lived and went away because he paused to ask and she asked him not to. The next tide was not pain. It was a door. He told her with his eyes when he entered, and she told him with her hands that the door belonged to both of them now. Time simplified. Outside, the night forgot to argue. When stillness returned, it was not empty. It perched like a bird choosing a branch. He brushed hair from her mouth and looked like a man who had been trusted with something true and knew how to hold it. You're shaking. Because I am not afraid. I never want you afraid. I will be sometimes. Then I'll remind you how to breathe. She laughed softly and the bed learned a new sound. She tucked under his collarbone and found the small drum of his breath. He covered her with the blanket Pia had straightened, as if the house itself finished the gesture. Sleep lifted her instead of pulling her under. When she drifted, it felt like swimming toward a shore that was watching. Dawn softened the room with a forgiveness color. Birds invented morning. Olives flashed silver. Isabella woke with her hand still on Luca's ribs and a calm that could not be scheduled. She opened the balcony. Cool air tasted of rain, turned memory. At the gate below, 2 Valenti guards stood like people who have slept in other storms. Floorboard spoke behind her, the honest whisper of a man standing who does not want to startle. You slept. Yes. Dream. Only the good kind. He came to the balcony and stopped at the polite distance that let someone else choose. She reached and brought him into the morning. He leaned on the rail, mouth soft with relief. You can see the road. I can see the world. A knock sounded, the kind a respectful house uses. Luca pulled on a shirt and opened. Katerina stood with a tray of coffee and fruit as if matriarchs carry breakfast every day. 2 guards waited halfway down the corridor. Katerina looked at the bed without fuss and at Isabella with light that had learned restraint. You did not sleep in fear. Not at all. Good. She set the tray by the balcony and stepped to the rail like a queen inspecting her own weather. He called again. Vittorio. Who else? He went charming, then loud, then quiet. Quiet is his truest key. I told him what stone can hold, then I sent him a list. What kind of list? Names of men who owe me more than they owe him. Some's already paid. One judge who likes to hunt and owes me birds. Also the fact that the girl he kept like a museum piece has a family that remembers the cost of glass. He will not walk through this gate. Bianca. Bianca will dress him for losing and convince him it was his idea. Katerina touched Isabella's cheek, a warm, brief anchor. Rest. Eat. Walk the olive path. Later we will call a lawyer to make paper behave, and a priest for the people who need that voice. This evening, if you wish, you may speak a promise in my garden. No hurry, the world has rushed you enough. Isabella looked at Luca. He only nodded as if to say choices look best on her when she wears them herself. I will speak, Isabella said. Not for paper, for me. Then my garden will dress properly. By afternoon, the house put on its quiet best. Gardeners trimmed without making a point of it. Guards posted in pairs that read as courtesy. The lawyer arrived in a clean suit and shook the cook's hand before anyone else's. A priest came and kept his voice small. Family gathered in ways that did not crowd the day. Isabella walked the path she had traced in words. Luca's step matched hers because he had learned it. At the rosemary hedge, bees argued their bright argument. At the little bridge, water pretended not to notice them. In the rose garden, canes wore new green and a few stubborn petals that had outlived the storm. She turned to the people who mattered. I am not a thing, I am not an answer other people paid for. My mother gave me a name and a light. My father tried to hide both. I brought the light here so it can be seen. Luca is the person I choose to stand beside me. He did not buy me. He did not break me open to look for what he wanted. He asked. I answered. That is all. Katerina's eyes shone in a way that had nothing to do with age. The lawyer nodded, as if law had just learned to listen. The priest blessed the air and stayed out of the way. Luca looked at Isabella as if the sun had agreed to begin at her feet. He spoke with the economy of a man who has nothing to sell. I will not speak for her. I will not stand between her and anyone. I will be where she asks. If she does not ask, I will be near enough to hear. Isabella reached for his hand. It fit like a truth found again after being told it was lost. They kissed, not as spectacle, but as a promise to stop living inside other people's sentences. Applause rose because hands need work when hearts are full. Guards clapped with restraint. Pia cried once and hid the evidence by smoothing a tablecloth that was already perfect. Caterina gathered Isabella into an embrace that told the past. It could sit down. Evening laid gold across the stone. Supper tasted like a language Isabella had always known and was finally allowed to speak. Later, in the blue chamber, windows opened to a night that belonged to her, Isabella leaned into Luca and felt the day settle in her bones. Are you happy? Yes. Say it again. Yes. They did not hurry to sleep. They shared quiet the way people share cake after a birthday. When they lay down, the house breathed with them. At first light she stood on the balcony. The olives flashed silver. The road was only a road. The gate was only a gate. Somewhere far away a man learned that a phone can make him smaller than his walls. Luca came to her side and rested his palm over hers on the rail. What are you thinking? That hidden flowers still grow. You are not hidden anymore. I know. She turned to him and the morning turned with her. The storm had passed. The house held. The map was hers. And when the day began, it did so without asking permission.